Okay, welcome everyone to the Planning Committee being held at 6 p.m. on the 16th of July 2020. I'd just like to remind everyone that due to the government guidelines on social distancing and COVID-19, the Planning Committee on the 16th of July will not be open to members of the public to attend, but will be broadcast live on YouTube. And of course, the recording of this meeting will be available on the council's website within 5 working days of this committee being held. I did, as we are obviously doing this via remote, I did want to obviously go over a few more ground rules. There were a few comments last time round from the press that they had a little bit of difficulty working out who was voting in what direction, as the cameras was not across the whole chamber. So what we're going to do this time is when we go to a vote, obviously it will be the same format. Wendy will do the counting and I will just read out what councillors have voted for what, just to assist anyone online. And we'll do that whilst these meetings are being held remotely. And then, I think that's everything. And obviously, just speak nice and clearly on the mics, and nice and clearly. Leave a gap before I go to you, and I'll do my best to call your names out prior to that. So just nice, loud and clear. Make sure the mics are on. Okay, so with that, we will open up the agenda. First off, are there any apologies for absence?
We've received no apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Number 2, the minutes of the meeting. Now, we are looking at the minutes of 2 meetings. That is committee held on the 8th of June 2020 and the 25th of June 2020. So we'll go through those now, and we'll pass any comments on the accuracy of the minutes. I do have some, but Councillor Rice has raised his hands, so I'll open the floor to Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. There were 2 items, actually. One, I just wanted to ask Lee, had the retirement village application now been sent off to the Secretary of State for his determination? And the other one, on page 6, it talks about declarations of interest at number 3. There seems to be a bit of confusion on this. It talks about you declared an interest for yourself and the other Conservative members sitting on the committee on item 7, Langdon Hills. And then you go on to say that the resident speaker, Tony Copeland, who'd spoken on this item at the initial hearing on the 13th of February, was also the chair of the Thurrock Conservative Party. That's all in order. It's not a problem. But I never remember Mr. Copeland speaking on Langdon Hills. So that seems to be a misprint, perhaps.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, you did read one of the declarations I wanted to declare. What we believe is that the minutes are incorrect. So we believe that the declaration of interest was on Little Thurrock Marshes. We're quite confident that is the case, because obviously had I said Langdon Hills, it probably would have been picked up at the time. But what we'll do, obviously this is why we go through the minutes, we'll get clarification of that, and we'll take it from there. So we're pretty confident that that is incorrect, and that's how that came about. Obviously, that was based on, I think there was a complaint was made, and the application was still live. So when I spoke to Lee earlier on, I was hopeful that we had addressed that. But you are right that I think that has been picked up again. So we'll get to the bottom of that.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, for that intervention.
Excellent, thank you. Was there any other comments on the accuracy of the minutes? There's quite a lot here to go through. But did anyone pick up on anything untoward? That was the only one I was going to raise, I think. No, I think everyone's happy. I mean, I have gone through them. I think it all looks good. So with that, Councillor Rice.
And just that question about the retirement village, Chair.
Over to Lee.
Has that gone across to the Secretary of State for his determination?
Yeah, over to Lee Nicholson, if you could comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application being referenced is application 19-01662 FUR, which is Langdon Hill Golf and Country Club. The sort of resolution passed at committee was that conditions and heads of terms needed to be agreed with the applicant team and also agreed with the chair of the committee. Since the item was considered at the meeting, there's been to and fro between the applicants and officers, and we received the draft heads of terms and draft heads of terms and conditions back earlier today. So officers will be going through them with a view to getting that to you, Chair, probably beginning part of next week. Thereafter, it will be sent off to the MPCU.
Thank you very much for that, Lee.
Yeah, no, fantastic, brilliant, excellent. Okay, right, so with that, are we happy with the accuracy of the minutes on both the 8th of June and the 25th of June? Is that agreed? Excellent. Agreed. Let's go on. Items of urgent business. There are none items of urgent business, but I would like to raise at this point that item 19/01058/OUT, that's been deferred at the request of the applicant. I believe we all would have received an email earlier on this week from a resident. It was in relation to a few concerns raised over, I believe it was internal conversations on a WhatsApp group. I think that was forwarded on to the applicant, and as such, the applicant has asked that the monitoring officer and legal overlook those comments. As such, that has been deferred, hopefully, to the next meeting. And I have discussed that with the monitoring officer. He's looking through that. I welcome that. I think obviously if anything untoward has taken place there, then it certainly needs to come to light. So item 9 will not be discussed this evening. I can't really comment too much on, I don't think, unless anyone wanted to field any questions. No. Okay. Excellent. All right then. So that takes us on to item 8. Oh no, sorry, I've jumped a gun there. Declarations of interest. Item 4. Now, are there any declarations of interest? And then obviously not item 5, that I'll go on to receive any correspondence. So this is any direct conflicts of interest. Okay, looking around the chamber, I don't believe there are any. No, okay. Excellent. All right then, so we now go on to item 5, declarations of receipt of any correspondence. Now, there has been quite a few emails this week, and I know a lot of these have been sent out to all members, so I'll read them out, and obviously if there's anything been missed, then please let me know. So first of all, I received an email today, that was from a James Bompass, that was in relation to item 10, and that went to all members. That's Little Mulgraves Farm. Hopefully we all received that. I then also received an email, Gary Coxall, that's item 8, and I believe that went to all members. That was land adjacent to Woodview. We then received the email from the resident Pat, who had concerns over item 9. That was Little Thurrock Marshes, which is being investigated, and I think that went to everyone. We also had an email from Hilary Goodman. That was in relation to item 9 as well. That's the deferred item. I understand she's an agent of representing them. And then I personally had an email from Councillor Piccolo. It was just in relation to the statement which will be read out this evening. I'm not sure I have to declare that, but I think that's safe too. And then that's it from me. Has anyone else received anything else? No? Okay. Steve Taylor, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just to let you know, you're probably aware, but I don't see any of those. I never do. So it doesn't make a world of difference, but I don't see them. So.
Yeah, I mean, strictly speaking, I would argue it is important that you do see those because obviously you're a very valued member of the team. So let's see if anything can be done about that. Maybe if we have a filtering process, I will certainly look up to that and pick that up with Lee.
Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, right. We'll go on to item 6. Just a reminder to members of the Planning Committee, we do have that site visit taking place on the 29th. That's the Tremorgan site visit. I think, Councillor Rice, you're planning on attending. I've got to check my calendar, but I will try my best to get there. Obviously, if members could do their best to get there. I know obviously I know people know the site quite well, but it's just when we go, we actually go inside. I know the applicants obviously have to spend a bit of time and resource and allowing us access to site. So if we could try our best to get there, I think that would be really important. So that's just a reminder. And with that, we'll go on to item 6, which is planning appeals. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to field? Lee, I understand you'll be picking up any appeal questions. Yeah, okay. Did we have any comments on the appeals? No, I did have a question on appeals. It was an interesting one on page 39. That's 4.3. Application, the Warren, Ridgewell Avenue, Alsett. Now, I've had a few bits of casework recently where residents have asked about conversions into habitable rooms, garages, and I know the council are very conscious of the idea of a garage being a parking space. Lee, so obviously the inspector has overruled that. He's approved this appeal. So, I mean, looking at this garage, are we now sort of saying, it could depend on the size of the garage, depends on whether it's a parking space? Is that something that the team will need to look into going forward? Because I know people are very keen to convert their garages if they're looking for that extra room.
Thank you, Chair. So all appeals that are received, all appeal decisions received are reviewed by the team and against. So the team will review them and look at existing policies and also look at the case-by-case basis for the detail. Clearly, with applications to convert garages, the size of garages will vary, width and depth of garages will vary all over the borough, and so there will be instances like this where the inspector's taken a different view to the officers. The point around this appeal was that where there's a high demand for on-street car parking, the ambition is always to ensure that there is off-street car parking provided for the safe flow of movement and traffic on the road. So, but as I say, we will review that case as we do with all the others.
Councillor Rice?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Application 1901184 FUL, land south of the allotment site and adjacent to 130 Heath Road, Chapel St Mary. I'd obviously have to declare an interest on this one, Chair, because that is my property that's mentioned in there. I just wanted to understand what's actually happened to that application. Was the appeal allowed or was it dismissed?
Thank you, Chair. So that is the application was refused, and that's an appeal which has been lodged. So the first applications listed on page 37, top part of 38, are ones which are coming into the system. So there's been no decision on that application yet.
Perhaps you can help me. What's the actual application for? So I can't remember this particular.
It would probably be worthwhile for officers to send you the link or the package of plans and the application form and the report. Then you have all the information to hand. So I'll take a quick note of that, Chair.
Fine, Chair. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So with that, we now go on to item agenda, I believe it's 7. That is a public address to the Planning Committee. So that now allows us to go on to, that leaves us with 5 items to discuss this evening. And the first item that we will be discussing is land adjacent to Woodview and Chadwell Road, Grays, Essex. That's pages 43 to 90. We do have Councillors Churchman and Potter with us remotely. However, I understand they won't be participating in this item, but then I can bring them back for the last 4. So with that, Matt, this is obviously the deferred item that we discussed. It was minded for approval. It's gone away. It's come back, and you'll very kindly present the report on your findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. While we're just getting the PowerPoint up. consultation response from NHS England, that was outstanding last time. That confirmed that they would be seeking a financial contribution, £29,700, if the application were to be approved. So looking at the presentation, just to remind you of the scheme. That's the site, Woodview off to the north, Chedwell Road to the south, so it's that triangular shaped site. Palmer's College, or what used to be Palmer's College, USP College now is to the south. Docker Road you can make out on the right hand side there. That's the site on Google Maps, so it's that green triangle. The site is within the metropolitan Greenbelt and comprises open land. There is no built development on the site. That's an extract from the core strategy locals plan. So that again, that sets out that the site is a green area. Surprisingly enough, that means it's within the metropolitan Greenbelt. And I think I pointed out last time that that hatched area to the north was the site of the former South East Essex College, which was a planned development, a planned release of Greenbelt for development through the core strategy. And obviously the building opposite the new college is occupying a new site in Grays. So that's just the site location plan, nothing new to show you there. An indicative layout is an application for outline plan permission with all matters reserved, so that's access, appearance, layout, scale and appearance. So take that potential layout of houses and flats as indicative. It's one way in which the site could be developed. And then the series of photographs, you may recall these from last time, so it's used for agricultural purposes at the moment. The site is used for grazing of cattle. So that's looking southeast towards the college, Woodview along the northern boundary there, and to the right that's the site. Further along Woodview, looking south into the site, that's looking northwest from Woodview again. I mentioned there was an indicative point of access, so there is a mini roundabout access which serves that fairly recent development on the old college site. So the access would be punched through a new arm from that roundabout, roughly where those two trees are on the skyline. Going some more views, this time from the southern boundary, so Chadwell Road. Again, looking across the site, it's showing the open nature of the site and lack of built development. Again, Chadwell Road again, and another couple in Chadwell Road. And I think the image which members looked at in quite some detail last time was that view there, which was, again, the full extent of the site from the western boundary looking east, showing its open nature and its agricultural use. So the previous report, just to sum up where we are at the moment, the previous report referred to the fact that it's a Greenbelt site, referred to the fact that residential development is by definition inappropriate and therefore there is harm, definitional harm as it's called. Inappropriate development is by definition harmful to a Greenbelt. There's no need to demonstrate that or to evidence it. It's just a fact as set out in national and local policies. The report previously referred to harm to openness. You can see in the pictures the site is open. One of the essential characteristics of the Greenbelt is openness, and that's referred to in paragraph 133 of the MPPF. So there would be harm to openness. Obviously, putting 75 houses with associated hard standings, etc., on an open site would, by definition, harm openness. And the report considered there was harm to 3 of the 5 purposes which the Greenbelt serves, and they would be firstly checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas because the site is on the edge of the built-up area. Secondly, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and thirdly, the purpose of the Greenbelt in assisting in urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of existing land within the built-up area. We also referred to visual harm associated with the potential noise barrier. So noise attenuation would be required in order to secure a reasonable living environment for new residents, and that barrier would be likely to be in the form of a fence, and the fence around that particular site would have some harm to the openness. So substantial weight was given to those combination of factors, and referring to national planning policy, inappropriate development, as is the case here, quoting directly from paragraph 144, inappropriate development should not be approved except in very special circumstances, and of key interest, very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the greenbelt by way of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. Now, on that point, the applicant brought forward a number of potential benefits in their case to promote the scheme and to potentially outweigh that identified harm. So they refer to the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. That is acknowledged. That was acknowledged within the previous report and in line with previous appeal decisions. And I'm referring in particular to Little Thurrock Marshes and to the appeal decision last month in Malvern. That factor can be afforded significant positive weight, so you can afford weight to that factor. The applicant also referred to a chapter in the NPPF entitled Delivering a Sufficient Supply of Houses. Now, obviously, that's related to the 5-year housing land supply, because a key part of government policy is making sure new housing is delivered. However, that does not override Greenbelt considerations. So that particular chapter of the NPPF doesn't give you carte blanche to override the chapter which refers to protecting the Greenbelt. The applicant also referred to Greenbelt purposes, in particular referred to the Thurrock Strategic Greenbelt Assessment from 2019. Now, we explained that's a document which will support the new local plan, and it was presenting options and options only, and it accompanies the issues and options consultation on the local plan also from last year. That issue was considered by the inspector at the Malvern appeal, which was decided last month, and only very limited weight was attached to that. It was only an option, therefore the strategic Greenbelt assessment was a step on the journey to a new local plan, and it couldn't be afforded any significant or material weight. The next argument put forward by the applicant was achieving sustainable development, and yes, the NPPF has presumption in favour of sustainable development. However, that presumption does not apply to the Greenbelt, so the tilted balance, as it's referred to at paragraph 11 of the NPPF, doesn't apply to the Greenbelt, albeit that some of the economic and social benefits of new development can be afforded some limited weight. The next argument put forward by the applicant was making effective use of land, and again, that's a chapter within the NPPF. That's more applicable to previously developed land. Again, wouldn't apply to the Greenbelt. The final argument put forward by the applicant and reported back in June was the NPPF reference to achieving well-designed places. Again, this is fairly standard. This is national policy, and it forms part of your own local plan policies, so it's not a benefit. It should be treated as a standard requirement for planning applications, and so no weight could be afforded to that. So where we got to in the report presented to you in June was that substantial harm would result to the Greenbelt, and we concluded that harm was not clearly outweighed by the benefits, and the NPPF test is that harm should be clearly outweighed for very special circumstances to exist. Therefore, those circumstances didn't exist, harm wasn't clearly outweighed, and the recommendation was to refuse planning permission on a point of principle in terms of Greenbelt and in terms of the visual harm which would be associated with a visual barrier. Now, where we got to in June was that members referred to some factors which they considered should be taken into account, and members actually resolved to take a different view and to seek to approve the application contrary to the recommendation. Now, in line with the Constitution, the report before you tonight sets out the implications of taking a decision contrary to the recommendation. And in summary, and this will be touched on by my colleague in legal before too long, as it is a Greenbelt site and you're looking at inappropriate development, it represents a departure. Therefore, any resolution to approve the case would have to be referred to the Secretary of State, and that's through the Planning Casework Unit. There is an inherent risk of calling with that route, and in particular, the Secretary of State could be interested if there's conflict with national policy on important matters. Now, clearly, Greenbelt is an important matter in terms of national and local policy. Now, there is a practical implication if the matter is called in, then practically speaking, that has implications for council officers. So all council officers would have to defend your decision. Putting it bluntly, I couldn't, because I'm recommending the scheme for refusal, and we'd have to find a resource within the local planning authority to defend that decision. And in terms of planning law, put simply, planning law requires determination in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. We don't think there are material considerations which would mean that a decision could be taken otherwise than in accordance with the development plan. The final thing on implications is the potential for future ad hoc proposals in the Greenbelt. You'll know we're working towards a new local plan, which has a backstop date at the end of 2023, and you'll know full well that potentially that can involve identifying sites in the Greenbelt, but the NPPF is quite clear that any release of Greenbelt sites should be coordinated through the development plan. So the potential implications of any decision to approve this scheme tonight would be, again, further potential applications on an ad hoc basis, which would be to the detriment of a potential planned release of Greenbelt in order to meet the borough's housing need going forward. Now, looking at your reasons you presented at last committee to support the scheme, we provided some analysis, and that starts at paragraph 3.10 of the report. Now, you refer to the contribution towards the 5-year housing land supply and provision of affordable housing. Again, these were considered in June, and they can be afforded significant positive weight. Yeah, we're not shying away from that. It's a benefit, and you can afford that weight. However, it's quite clear from recent appeal decisions, and again, I'm relying on Little Thurrock Marshes, and I'm referring to the Balfron site from last month, that factor on its own will not clearly outweigh the harm. So it needs to be more. There needs to be more convincing arguments other than the contribution to 5-year housing land supply and affordable housing. The second factor you referred to was the council's housing waiting list, and we've provided a summary of those times, if you like, at paragraph 3.12 of the report. Obviously, the provision of affordable housing is recognised as a benefit. I've just referred to it, and again, in June, we referred to it as a benefit, and you can put positive weight on that factor. But again, on its own, it's not enough to clearly outweigh the harm. So yes, it would help in terms of the council's housing waiting list, but you need more than that in order to justify taking a decision which is contrary to the council's development plan policies for the Greenbelt. The third reason you referred to is you considered there'd be limited harm to the purposes of the Greenbelt. Now, I've mentioned the three purposes we refer to. That's A, C, and E. So, hang on just a second to check my notes. Yes, so A is checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. C is assisting in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and E is to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging recycling of basically previously developed land. Now, as the site is on the edge of the built-up area, there's no getting away from that. It's right on the edge of the built-up area to the north and to the east. We can't conclude that there'd be a lesser amount of harm. So by building on this site, there would be further sprawl to the large built-up area, i.e. the area which extends from Grays through to West Thurrock, through to Purfleet. So on a broad geographical scale, this is on the edge of that built-up area, and you can't escape the fact that there would be some sprawl occurring if this site were to be developed. Purpose C, clearly the site's an open field. You can see from that picture, it's an open field. The Greenbelt primarily is a spatial designation, so you don't have to consider issues about the landscape quality. That's immaterial in planning terms to the greenbelt consideration here. So, with reference to the term countryside, it doesn't have to be an area of outstanding natural beauty. Countryside can mean a number of things. It can mean a field, it can mean marshland, it can mean forest, it can mean a number of different landscape types. The key point is it's open land, and the greenbelt is a spatial designation. So the landscape quality is not particularly material here. So again, it's hard to conclude that there would be any lesser amount of harm to purpose C, which is assisting in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Now, purpose E, there is some reference we've referred to in the report to the recent Baldwin appeal, where the inspector balanced the conflict with that purpose and the potential reasons for release. Now, the inspector there sort of just said basically that's a judgment for the decision maker. So on that particular point, you could conclude there's a lesser amount of harm. However, we're saying to you quite clearly, we don't think you can conclude on purposes A and C that there is a lesser amount of harm. There is demonstrable harm on those particular two factors. The fourth factor you relied on was that you consider more weight should be afforded to the contribution towards sustainable development, and the NPPF sets out basically that the purpose of the planning system is to contribute towards sustainable development, and that sustainable development has three particular objectives. That's an economic objective, a social objective, and an environmental objective. There is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. That's called the tilted balance, which is referred to in paragraph 11 of the NPPF. However, the footnotes to that particular paragraph basically says that certain interests of acknowledged importance, including the greenbelt, that tilted balance, i.e. that presumption in favour of sustainable development, simply does not apply. So we can't add extra weight to its contribution to sustainable development in light of that particular part of the NPPF. The fifth factor you referred to was the package of Section 106 contributions, and the scheme would provide policy compliant affordable housing, so that's 35%, and it would provide contributions towards education, healthcare, and the RAMS payment, which is the recreational mitigation payment, which we've recently been seeking. On the issue of affordable housing, that is a policy requirement. Your own local plan policies require that. It is a benefit. Again, we've set out within the report the contribution towards 5-year housing land supply, including affordable housing, is a benefit. But you should also see it in terms of it is a requirement of your own policies. And in that respect, both the NPPF and the core strategy say very simply that local planning authorities should seek to pursue obligations where there is impact as a result of development. So on the question of education contributions and healthcare and the RAMS payment, these really aren't benefits. What these are doing is mitigating the impact of the development. So a development of 75 houses and flats will have an impact on education provision in the borough, and also healthcare, and also recreational pressures elsewhere further afield, which is why we're seeking that RAMS payment. So it shouldn't be seen as benefit. It should be seen as mitigation. It should be seen as a development washing its own face, if you like, consuming its own smoke. It is not a benefit over and above mitigation of impact. The sixth factor you referred to was you considered the scheme was shovel ready. Now, we've researched that and we found that in June the government did call for a number of schemes in response to COVID, obviously because COVID's had an impact on the economy. We're all well aware of that. So the government was looking at schemes which were ready to go and would deliver economic benefits. In particular, related to large-scale infrastructure. We don't think that's particularly relevant to a scheme for 75 houses. And with regard to shovel-ready, this is an application for outline planning permission. If permission were to be granted, following referral to the Secretary of State, you would then be looking at reserve matter submissions. You would then be looking at applications for discharge of pre-commencement conditions before any development would occur. So judged against that criteria, we don't consider it shovel-ready. It's not at an advanced planning stage such that it's ready to go, which would be one of the characteristics of shovel-ready. The final factor referred to was the employment benefits during construction. And yes, there would be benefits short-term during construction. Economic benefits are referred to. And there's also be household expenditure. So a new household obviously would have local expenditure, and that would have some benefit to the economy. However, it's a relatively small scheme. That therefore means there's only limited weight you can afford to that factor. Concluding all that together, and I'm throwing a lot of information there at you, but we've been quite forensic in going through those 7 factors you refer to. There is some overlap between those factors and what the applicant was promoting as benefits anyway. So the 5-year housing land supplied, affordable housing, contribution to sustainable development, they're factors which we've referred to previously anyway because the applicant referred to them. We've concluded that those combination of factors and those benefits don't clearly outweigh the harm, and that is the decisive policy test. Those benefits have to clearly outweigh harm, and we consider there's substantial harm to the Greenbelt here for the reasons I've set out. Because that harm isn't clearly outweighed, very special circumstances do not exist. Therefore, the reasons for refusal have not been addressed in our opinion, and the recommendation remains unchanged. At this point, I think we're going to refer to the Council's legal officer just to briefly run through the legal implications of a decision contrary to the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Wendy, if you'd like to go to Caroline Robbins.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, members.
And if so?
Yeah. Okay, so, hello? Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Chair. Hello, Caroline, we can hear you if you'd like to proceed. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, that's great. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. The matter has been returned to members for consideration following the relevant process of your constitution. Matthew has accordingly considered the reasons members gave the last committee meeting to approve this matter, contrary to officer recommendation. He's responded in the committee report, which will, of course, all have read, and has explained his reasoning further to you at this meeting, and he's explained that the recommendation is still to refuse. Matthew's also raised some of the risks and implications of the decision, and for the sake of brevity, I won't repeat those. However, if members remain keen to approve the application against officer recommendation, members need to be mindful it's critical that their decision is lawful, because a non-lawful decision will not be permitted to stand. As previously advised, an unlawful decision would trigger a report to be done by the monitoring officer under Section 5 Local Government and Housing Act 1989, which would be taken to full council. As members have been made aware, this is a grave process and it's to be avoided at all costs. Other than advising members to vote in accordance with officer recommendation in the report, officers actually have no mechanism sorry, this jumped a bit. Have no mechanism to prevent members from making an unlawful decision that would trigger a Section 5 report. Officers will, of course, ask members to provide their reasons, but ultimately the reasons rest with members to provide. Members are reminded that even if a decision appears to be lawful during a meeting, it can be very difficult to spot whether or not that decision is challengeable in the courts. And clearly a judicial review challenge could be very costly to the council. In this case, there are two reasons for refusal, and both of these must be addressed. It's important to remember that as a matter of law and your constitution, your decision must stand up to the scrutiny of the planning merits. Now, members are referred to paragraph 4 of the report, which provides guidance for decision making, including greenbelt considerations. And the other thing to remember is that members' decision must be supported by robust evidence. In this particular case, it's worth mentioning that the second reason for refusal relates to the impact of acoustic fencing, and this could involve some technical considerations. So if members disagree with officers on the needs or the nature of this fencing, the reason for rejecting officer recommendation is required to be backed up by cogent technical evidence that refutes the officer recommendations on that point. So to summarise, the development is inappropriate development in the green belt, and planning permission should not be approved except in very special circumstances. If members decide to refuse the application in accordance with officer recommendation, the decision will be lawful. However, if members are minded to approve, your reasons must demonstrate reasonable planning grounds for taking a decision contrary to officer advice. They must be clear, convincing, and substantiated by evidence. Because the site is in green belt, in addition, for the decision to be lawful, NPPF paragraph 144 requires that the harm to the green belt must be outweighed clearly and decisively by benefits. Otherwise, the NPPF requires the scales to be tipped in favour of harm, and it would not be lawful to approve. Even if an approval was lawful for reasons I've just stated, there's no guarantee it would not be an unwise decision. It's important to decide your willingness to accept the stated risks before you vote, because after it will be too late. You've also been reminded that what it is that the law, policy and your constitution require from you, and the tests that a decision to approve must meet. Remember, the scheme will remain inappropriate development in the green belt, whether or not very special circumstances are clearly, i.e. decisively, demonstrated. So in short, your reasons to depart from officer advice must clearly and decisively meet the test in NPPF 144. They must be clear and stand up to scrutiny, or you must refuse. And that is your judgment. Thank you, Chair. That's me done.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we'll now go to... Don't have it. We've had the speaker statements on this one. And Councillor Rice, you had your hand up, so if you'd like to ask Matthew a question, thank you.
I'd just like to make a statement, Chair. We've heard this planning advice given now the second time, and here we have legal advice from Paul Shadovarian, a QC of Cornerstone Barristers in London, and he says, members are not bound to accept the recommendations of planning officers, and provided they start on the premise that substantial weight must be given to the harm caused to the greenbelt, they may, when applying the paragraph 144 test, differ on the weight to be ascribed to other relevant matters, including the positive benefits of a scheme, provided they do not act irrationally in doing so and do not take irrelevant matters into account and apply the relevant statutory and policy tests. Now, that paragraph, Chair, sums it up in a nutshell that these are the considerations the members can take, and it's quite clear in his advice. We've heard of our legal opinion, we've heard the officers, but we have the power to move away from that, and I'd just like that noted, Chair, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I do note your comments, Councillor Rice, and I understand where you're coming from. But I mean, with the greatest respect, this gentleman that you raised, the member of the Queen's Council, with respect, he's not held to the same account we are, and he doesn't have the power we have. And ultimately, you know, it's not his neck is not on the line here. Now, ultimately, you've raised it yourself, irrelevant and irrational. I do think you're going to have trouble this evening jumping over the hurdle of the acoustic barrier. I can't see how you can rationally overcome that, but we will find out. But ultimately, you do raise some interesting points, and you have done in the past. Now, as members of the planning committee, we do have, you could almost argue, it's a special privilege. We have a power to be able to make these decisions. And I think ultimately what we have to do is be responsible. Now, there are two things that really frustrate government. I think the first one is what you raise correctly, is that we absolutely need to build homes. And if we don't build enough homes and we reject everything that comes to us, then ultimately they come in and take over. On the same spectrum, but on the other end, if we're irrational and we're irresponsible with developing on Greenbelt, then ultimately they will come in as well and take over. So I understand what you're saying, but ultimately we are elected to make these difficult decisions, and also we are elected. I mean, I'm not aware of a councillor who has ever been elected on a manifesto will vote for me and I'll protect the Greenbelt. Sorry, vote for me and I'll develop on the Greenbelt. Actually, quite the contrary. I think every time we're up for election, one of our main manifesto pledges is, you elect us, we are going to be responsible, we are going to protect you. So I understand that. I know I recently have voted in favour of Langdon Hills, but I can stand up and say that I do think there was a conflict there between C2 and C3, and I can defend it based on the benefit. I think what we're looking at here is simply housing. So I get where you're coming from, but it'll be interesting to see what other members say. Councillor Fletcher, you raised your hands. We are still doing questions, but please feel free to make a statement.
Sure. I have a question, but just before that, as far as I'm concerned, what we are doing, and the example of Langdon Hills, I think is a good demonstration. We are doing exactly what Mr. Shadowberry is talking about, in that we have, on one or two occasions, differed. And we've differed in the weight we ascribe to different factors. So I don't think anybody's in disagreement in this chamber about our right to do that. I don't think that's the issue. What I would like to ask Matthew is what I'm trying to get clarified in my own mind. Are you saying that the reasons that we put for accepting this proposal aren't material, or that they are material, but you disagree on the weight of them? I think this comes back to that point. So are any of them not material and therefore they wouldn't be acceptable if this went further? Or is it merely a question of you differ from our interpretation of the weight?
I think it's a combination of both, to be honest with you. For example, previously, at the previous committee, you referred to this scheme being shovel ready, and the research we've conducted into that would suggest this wouldn't be covered by that particular initiative, so that's immaterial. In terms of the other factors, there's overlap. There's clear overlap between some of the factors you were relying on in June and the factors which were promoted by the applicant anyway. So by that I mean the reference to 5-year housing allowance supply, and within that affordable housing, and also the housing waiting list are all associated issues. And we've been very clear with you that the contribution of this scheme in terms of delivering housing, including affordable housing, and by implication its effect on the housing waiting list, you can afford that significant positive weight. However, the appeal decisions we keep on seeing say that is not enough. That's on its own, that's not going to tip the balance, and the balance has to be tipped clearly, not marginally, not as a matter of judgment. A couple of the other bits and pieces where perhaps it's more of an interpretation, I think mainly it's to do with the weight you ascribed to the harm to the Greenbelt purposes. Our view, my view, is that you can't conclude that there's a lesser degree of harm to two of those purposes. So that's purpose A and C. So that's about
checking unrestricted sprawl and about safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. The reasons why we've come to that view is the site is on the edge of the built-up area. And if you then extend that built-up area, there would be sprawl de facto. I don't think you need to argue that point. On purpose C, it's an open field. That's perfectly clear from the photographs you've seen. So developing 75 houses, car parking, residential curtilage, the usual domestic paraphernalia on an open site would cause demonstrable harm to that purpose. Purpose E we refer to as the Baldwin appeal decision. The inspector sort of left it hanging, frankly, and I think there is some judgment to be made there. So that is an interpretation, but certainly on two of those three purposes, I don't think you conclude there's a lesser degree of harm. There is demonstrable harm. Going back to the other bits and pieces, well, I think we've covered your contribution towards sustainable development, the tilted balance, as it's called. So that basically means paragraph 11 of the NPPF says that where local plan policies are out of date. So, for instance, because we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply, the council's policy for housing is out of date. So NPPF would say the tilted balance should apply. You should presume to grant permission. Footnote at the bottom, doesn't apply in the Greenbelt. And again, Little Thurrock Marshes appeal, Baldwin appeal. So yes, there would be some contribution towards the planning objectives of sustainable development, i.e. there'd be some short-term construction jobs, there'd be some limited household expenditure, but it's not going to tip the balance, even in combination with the contribution to housing land supply. So looking at the factors both the applicant and you relied on, and some of them were the same factors, frankly, there's not enough there, in my view, to demonstrate that harm is clearly outweighed, and that's the key policy test before you tonight.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. So, Matthew, if I can summarise what I understand from that then. So, although there are maybe one or two of the elements the committee has put forward which wouldn't pass the materiality test, most of them, from the sound of it, are material. There is overlap, but even if it's 3 or 4 different versions of the same argument, it is a material argument. So the question there is a case of whether we continue to differ over the weight of that material argument. But what I also get from you is that where we've suggested that the harm is less, we're not in a position to do so because the harm is demonstrable and therefore, from what I read here, must be regarded as significant. Is that correct?
Yeah, NPPF says you have to put substantial weight on harm. So we, the reasons why the reports are written as they are is because there's been good case law, if you like, to suggest that you have to decide whether or not development is appropriate or inappropriate. Then you have to identify harm. It's not just harm to the Greenbelt, it's any other harm, which is why I refer to the acoustic. That microphone just went off, sorry. And the final thing we do in the report is then the balancing exercise. Now Councillor Rice referred to Paul Shadarivian, and that's basically what he's referring to, the balancing exercise. But the NPPF is very clear. Substantial weight has to be given harm. You don't have to argue that point. You don't have to demonstrate it. That's just starting position. And inappropriate development is by definition harmful. So 75 houses in the Greenbelt, by definition, inappropriate development, it's harmful as your starting point. Then we go on to talk about harm to openness. It's an open field. There must be harm to openness and the purposes. Now, I've said one of the purposes is probably debatable, but purposes A and C, I don't think you've got any latitude on that point, is my opinion. So it is a balancing exercise. Again, going back to the point, Councillor Rice referred to with that QC advice. It is a balancing exercise, but you start from affording substantial weight to harm, and then trying to get to a position where that harm, which might be up here, is clearly outweighed. So it's not just there; it's got to be miles away. So yeah, affordable housing land supply, fines, significant positive weight. But everything we've seen, Little Thurrock Marshes appeal, Baldwin appeal from last month, it's not enough. And I'm just being honest. There's really not enough in there in terms of what the applicant is promoting and the factors you relied on to, in combination, show that harm is clearly outweighed. So the applicant relying on MPPF references to good design, there's nothing in that. I mean, talking frankly, there's nothing in that. You should expect that anyway. The council's own policy requires good design. The MPPF requires good design. There's simply nothing in that. You cannot afford it in any way. So on that balancing exercise, yeah, harm is up there, and we're not convinced that the benefits are clearly above it, putting it simply.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. So, Councillor, I'd like to go to Councillor Lawrence for a question, then Steve Taylor, then I'll come in with a question. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the acoustic fencing. Could you tell me the properties what are along there, what was released and built in place of the technical college? What sort of acoustic fencing have they got along there and for the noise barrier and protection?
Yeah, Chair, the properties which were built probably, I'm guessing, they probably started about 10 years ago on the former college site, don't have acoustic fencing. But the advice we've received from the council's environmental health officer, which is in response to the applicant's submitted noise report, is that attenuation is needed, and that would be in the form of a fence.
Yeah, well, I suppose I could understand that, because with the Woodview, I understand that was all abiding because you swapped the land so you could build the new college in Grays. But 362 flats and houses is quite a lot on that area, which is Greenbelt. And if anything, that causes more trouble than what this application is. As far as I'm concerned, I keep looking at it, and that little patch of land that I'm looking at now doesn't go as far into Chadwell, the other area, as what's already existing there now. To me personally, in my mind, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. The officers have it in their mind and we have it in our mind, and that's why we get a chance to make a decision and have opinions. But the core strategy provides guidance as to what conceives as special circumstances, I know. But in the MPPF, Parcel 31 only comes down to slight negligible importance and doesn't undermine the purpose of the Greenbelt, in my mind, because of this small area and the small build on it. Whereas previously, you'd give a go-ahead for 362, which is an awful lot. So with the fencing and everything on it, I'd like to know, is this the way you're going to be forward now? Is it because you've already got ideas in your mind where you think you should be building on Greenbelt, so we should wait to see what you say and then just go ahead with you? Or would it be okay for us to go ahead and say that we need homes? Because basically I've had another email tonight from another resident pleading with me to get homes. So it would be nice to have an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I think there were probably two or three things there. So reference was made to the former college site, which, yes, is, I can't recall the exact number, but it's circa 300 houses and flats. That was a planned release of the Greenbelt through the core strategy. So, yes, it was Greenbelt, but the argument considered by this council at the time was that there was a need for a new campus in the town centre, a more sustainable location that justified a planned release, if you like, or a planned change in the Greenbelt boundary so that the college could relocate and housing could go on that particular site. That probably relates to the last point you made about planned delivery. So I referred to one of the implications of taking a decision contrary to the recommendation would be sort of ad hoc raids on the Greenbelt. Put simply, applicants may well take a chance and make an application for a site in the borough, potentially anywhere in the borough in the Greenbelt. And we'd be firefighting on individual sites all over the place. The logical way to plan for new development is through the local plan, and we are working through a local plan at the moment, and there is a backstop date of 2023 for adoption. I hope it will be earlier than that, but obviously that depends on things like Lower Thames Crossing to a degree. That local plan will have to look comprehensively at where new development is needed, including housing development, and I think we all know that new housing is needed. Obviously your inboxes, you've referred to your inbox and your constituents who are seeking new housing. So yes, new housing is needed, but the appropriate way to do that in land use planning terms is through a new local plan. So you look at sites are promoted by landowners and developers potentially. We look at them, we look at their location, we look at their constraints, we look how easy they are to development, whether or not that be sustainable. And we take, through consultation and ultimately full council, will take a view about where that development should occur, rather than just responding to individual planning applications at planning committee every other month or whatever it is. So that point about planning for a release, that and the college, that was a planned release, and about the future local plan, they are related, but it is through a properly constructed, thought about local plan which assesses all options and then promotes the most sustainable, the most rational way of accommodating new growth in the borough over the next plan period. A couple of other things you did refer to. One, you referred to very special circumstances and a reference to the core strategy. The core strategy does not set out what are very special circumstances. In fact, they aren't set out anywhere. It's up to an applicant to promote benefits or factors in support of their scheme, which, if they clearly outweigh harm, would then equal very special circumstances. So there's not like a checklist of factors or which equals very special circumstances. Now you sit here and you see schemes promoted before you, and certain factors always come up, like contribution towards housing land supply, like affordable housing, for example. Those benefits could combine to create very special circumstances, but we haven't got a bullet point list of what a very special circumstance is. Finally, I think you referred to the Council's Greenbelt assessment and Parcel 31, and that's something the applicant has referred to. So again, looking at the new local plan, as part of the work to support that document, last year consultants were engaged to look at parcels of Greenbelt across the borough. It wasn't individual sites, it wasn't this particular site, it was larger scale parcels of land, and to make an assessment of their contribution towards 3 of the 5 Greenbelt purposes, I think it was. So that document is there, and the applicant has relied on that. That document will contribute and will form part of the story of the new local plan. You can't rely on it now, though, because it will inform potential options for changing Greenbelt boundaries later this year or next year or the year after. I would point out that at the Baldwin appeal decision, the appellant looked at the issues and options consultation. So that was the local plan issues and options consultation from the early part of last year, which identified a number of different development scenarios for new residential development and other development, but in this case residential development. And that, could it be large scale new settlements? Could it be urban extensions? Could it be village extensions? The inspector was very clear that issues and options consultation, of which the Greenbelt assessment was a part, was an option. It wasn't the final option, it wasn't the preferred option, it was an option. It may not come to anything, and the inspector gave that no weight. So although the applicant has referred to it, and I'm sure future applicants may well refer to it, it's not advanced enough as a document for it to be afforded anything but only very limited weight. I think that answers your 4 points. Correct me if I'm...
Councillor Lawrence.
I was told the other day by an officer that you've been behind it for 10 years now, building properties in the area. So if we sit back and wait until we get the plan, say to another 3 years, how long do you think it'd take before you catch up with the building programme, what you've got designated? If we all sit back and don't try and push to build on little areas here and there to get homes for families, because my resident, another one, I've had 2 this week, it's been on waiting for a 1-bedroom flat since 2013. So if you're saying for the past 10 years that you've been behind and you haven't been building, and now you're saying we still can't build at the moment, we've got to go ahead of what you say and take your time and all this and that, how long do you think residents are going to have to wait before the council does catch up in the planning department and start building homes?
Yeah, Chair. The housing figures we have in the core strategy and the new housing figures we'll have in the local plan once adopted are target figures. So it's an assessment of what our housing needs will be based on socio-economic factors going forward. So it's a projection about what we'll need. We have been, in terms of demonstrating a 5-year housing land supply, so what that means simply is that you have permissions, sufficient permissions granted so that the house building industry, because ultimately is the house building industry who will deliver the vast majority of new housing, so that we can demonstrate there's 5 years supply based on an assessed need, hopefully an objectively assessed need. We've known for a long time, being honest, we've known for a long time we haven't had a 5-year housing land supply. I defended an appeal in North Stifford in 2010 at the former Development Corporation, and the inspector at that point said the council hasn't got a 5-year housing land supply, that's a problem, and the council needs to address it. It's a long-term problem we have. It's to do with any number of factors. Permissions being granted and house builders not implementing those permissions, for example. Some of the constraints we have in the borough, contaminated land, flood risk, and put simply 2/3 of the borough or 60% of the borough is greenbelt. So we have an issue that's known, that's been known a long time. The way to unstop that problem is through a new local plan to identify greenbelt release, because it will be greenbelt release, but through a properly planned, rational process which identifies the most sustainable sites for development. So the least harmful sites, the most sensible sites for development. That's a process we're going through. I appreciate the frustration it's taking time. There's frustration from officers that it's taking time, and there are factors why it's been delayed so far, not least because the Lower Thames crossing, if that happens, will change quite drastically the geography of the borough. So we can't plan for a local plan with the context of with the Lower Thames crossing going on at the same time. So the new local plan will unblock the issue, in my opinion. But I will make the point that even though we've known for a long time we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply, that has not stopped us as an authority winning appeals. And again, I'll go back to Little Thurrock Marshes from 2 years ago, and I'll go back to the Balfour appeal decision from last month, where the applicant relied very heavily on housing land supply, including affordable housing. And obviously, that refers to the council's housing waiting list and all the rest of it, and said, yes, that's a benefit, but on its own, it doesn't clearly outweigh greenbelt harm. And we're in a similar position now with this particular case, in my opinion.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for taking your time and explaining that all to us. And I do understand that, and I do realise we have got to build on greenbelt. And I know you're quite excellent in appeals in stopping it being done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, what we'll do, we'll go to Steve Taylor, then myself, then Councillor Rice, then Councillor Byrne. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Matt. I'm just trying to make sure in my mind, one of the things that you mentioned when you were saying about how these things are balanced was about contributions and affordable housing. But my understanding is that this is ignoring what's already drawn in front of us, since that's unlikely to be what you would end up with if it were Sorry, I apologise. Is that not true? That because you don't know what's going to be built, to say that there's going to be a Section 106 contribution, there's going to be affordable housing, which by the way isn't local authority housing, it's just affordable, which means something somewhat different. But because the plan you've got in front of you, as I understand it, this is a planning application to determine whether or not the outline is agreed on a piece of greenbelt. It isn't an agreement of a scheme. So in my mind, any contributions or benefits that might be seen are false, because at this moment in time, whether it was approved or not, you have no idea what you might end up with at the end of that if outline were granted. Am I right in saying that?
Chair, it is an application for outline planning permission, but the way to think about outline planning permission is it establishes the principle and it establishes parameters. Now, one of the parameters here is the number of units, so 75 units. So from 75 units, you can work out education contributions, you can work out healthcare contributions, and you can work out the affordable housing. So the contributions would relate to that parameter, which would be established if there was a decision to vary from the recommendation before you. What isn't for discussion now are the finer grain details. So the appearance, the elevational details, the precise layout. I mean, I put up an indicative layout, and given the size of the site, that could be probably quite a reasonable idea of how it could be laid out, because obviously there's only a finite amount of land and there's X number of units and you've got to get one into the other. So there's only a limited amount of variation on that. Things like scale, well, it's going to be 2, maybe some 3-story. But going back to your point about the contributions, we can, with certainty, establish them now based on 75 units. So if a decision was taken to approve, again, I'm not recommending it, but if the decision was taken to approve, the contributions would be based on a known factor, if you like. Now, if further down the line the applicant came back and said, well, I want 95 units, then all bets are off. The whole issue about contributions would need to be renegotiated because it's a different scheme. So we can get to an affordable housing contribution, and we can get to financial contributions based on a scheme for 75 units, yes.
But am I right in saying then that if somewhere down the road somebody does a viability study and says, actually that doesn't work anymore, so we're going to do away with most of the affordable housing and we need to reduce the 106 agreements, then all of a sudden that starts to all go out the window, which I've seen sitting here on multiple applications over the last 8 or 10 years, however long. Am I right in saying that that's really how it works?
Chair, I hear what you're saying, because there have been schemes which have come to this committee, residential schemes predominantly, where a 106 agreement, or the heads of terms for 106 agreement, have been discussed and agreed by this committee, and then further down the track there's been an application to amend those obligations. Now that can be for a variety of factors. The one I'm particularly thinking of was St Chad's, which is the one in my recent memory, where they got on site and they discovered a load of asbestos, which was unforeseen, and that obviously blew a hole in the budget, and members eventually had to agree a reduced affordable housing contribution. So it can happen if further down the track, and it's buts and maybes, because obviously it would need to rely on a resolution to grant planning permission ultimately, which again I'm not recommending. If heads of terms were agreed at this stage, and an applicant further down the track said, viability is tight and I can't do it, well, one, we'd need a viability assessment, two, we'd need to independently appraise that assessment, and three, it would need an application of what's called a deed of variation to the legal agreement, and we'd probably bring it back before committee for you to take a view. Just as an aside, on this particular site, although there's a former landfill site to the south east, I think, we're not aware that the site's contaminated. It's an open greenfield site, so you assume the applicant would have done their homework in terms of utilities and services. You assume they would know if there's anything untoward, a high pressure gas pipeline or whatever, and they've done their homework. So in the grand scheme of things, it's an open field. It's not that difficult to develop. So there shouldn't be abnormal costs, but I take your point.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And equally, I would argue that it's, as with the one in Chapel, it should be down to the applicant to do proper due diligence on the site beforehand to know that they have to deal with contamination. And if they don't, in a commercial world, it would be, that's your problem. And unfortunately, it's generally Thurrock that loses out when these things go wrong. That's my view. And that's the point I was trying to get to. Part of what if my understanding was right, part of, if you like, your balancing thing was looking at what the contribution of the site could be in the future. I guess I was just trying to check that there isn't actually a guarantee that that's what you would end up with. And I guess I think you've answered that, and basically the answer is no, there isn't.
Yeah, just Chair, if I can just jump in on the factor which members referred to at the last committee, which was the package of 106 contributions, and they were seen as a benefit. I made the point quite clearly in presentation that securing education contributions, financial contributions, healthcare contributions, contributions towards recreational mitigation, they shouldn't be seen as benefits. That is about mitigation. It's about the scheme having an impact and the developer mitigating that impact, the scheme washing its own face, consuming its own smoke. The affordable housing issue, yes, it's policy compliant, so all the applicant is doing is complying with policy, but that has been held to be a benefit under the heading of general housing land supply.
Okay, excellent. All right then. So let's look at the time. It's obviously 7:20. I think we need to start making progress. So what we'll do when we're asking the questions, we keep it nice, short and concise. And Matthew, we'll probably have to move on to debate shortly. I think I've got three more people. I'm next. So Matthew, very briefly, from the last meeting, we've had some letters through. If you could give us a quick rundown on the consensus of those letters that have come through to you, just some bullet points. I believe there was more. Was there more letters come through? I think since the last committee meeting, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, we did have one from a resident, which I said was basically reiterating former objections and expressing some disappointment about how members resolved at the last committee meeting. I think all members of committee were copied into a letter from the agent, which sets out some bullet points, which were basically the applicant's benefits which we've addressed, I think, fairly clearly and comprehensively within the committee report. And I mean, in particular, that third bullet point, if you've got that letter in front of you, again, it refers to the Council's strategic greenbelt assessment. And the applicant obviously feels that's a benefit. We've referred to that within the report. It's part of the story for the new local plan. Obviously, the Evolve and Appeal decision from last month, the issues and options consultation was just seen as a series of options and no weight was afforded to that factor. So in our view, there's nothing in that letter from the agent which adds anything new to the debate or creates any further benefits which you could weigh in the balance.
Okay, thank you. And there was a comment here in relation to NHS England. Was there a suggestion that in the area that they're a little bit overrun? Could you comment on that more?
Yeah, Chair. So at the last committee, we didn't have a formal consultation response from NHS England. We have that now. So paragraph 2.2 refers to that consultation response. They've referred to, I mean, I haven't got the detail in front of me, but they've referred to three surgeries surrounding the site, which could potentially be impacted. So new residents obviously would need to register at a local GP practice, and potentially that could impact on 3 local practices. At present, they don't have capacity. So what NHS England do is operate a formula whereby they look at the potential number of new residents, they look at the people on the waiting list or on the GP's list already, and they ascribe a potential new floor space for expansion, and then they from all that equation you get a financial figure. So basically they're looking at £29,700 as a potential 106 contribution, which would be spent on, I'm assuming, well, one or more of those local surgeries.
Thank you, Matthew. 29 pretty weak. I mean, that's if you've got surgeries at capacity, 29 grand's not going to solve any problems. But obviously, I assume that's past some form of agreement, Section 106 agreement test.
It would be. It would need to be secured through a Section 106. Now, the actual amount of the contribution, as I said, is a calculation which NHS England undertake, and I think, put simply, it's looking at the people generated by the development, the local surgeries and who's on the books, so to speak, and if there's a shortfall, a pro rata figure about amount of floor space needed to accommodate that new need, and then ascribing a figure. So it wouldn't be, you're quite right, 29,700 wouldn't pay for a new surgery, but it might, in combination with other contributions, start to pay for an extension to a surgery, you know, a new consulting room, that sort of thing.
Okay, I think we've got 2 more questions and then we'll go on to debate and then head towards a vote. We'll go to Councillor, I think Byrne first, and Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just a quick one. It only is yes or no. Been mentioned previous meetings today, like somebody waiting for a 1-bedroom flat. Feels like this. Would that make any difference? Does this take anybody off the council list, or this people still waiting for a 1-bedroom flat?
I think the short answer is yes, it potentially would do, because there would be some affordable housing, which would be, I'm looking at paragraph, where are we? 3.12. So the affordable housing would be 28 1- and 2-bedroom dwellings. I think they're apartments, as shown in the proposal. The council, through the 106, would get nomination rights. So, yes, there could be some benefit to the housing waiting list.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Matthew, part of our problem as an authority is we are still working off an old plan that dates back to 96. We have a suite of policies, such as the core strategy, but now the government have told us quite clearly we have to build 32,000 homes over a 20-year period. Now, with that in mind, and we're already delayed in our local plan, and we've heard from Lee this evening to say that the local plan should be ready by 23. But if that was to slip further, that puts more pressure on us. And the point I'm really driving at is because of the failure of this authority not to have a local plan, we are now faced in this position. We have to give due weight to every application, and as our planning director has often reminded us, every application is treated on its merits. So the question really I'm going towards is that because we're still working off an old plan of 96, this is causing our problems, and this is why these applications keep coming forward. And we have to judge them on the merits and the benefits, etc., and you explain them, and then we have to, as members, as the elected arm of this committee, make a decision. So what I am asking you, Matthew, is we're in this predicament because of the failure of this authority that we're still working off a 96 plan. Is that correct?
Chair, the council had a borough local plan which was adopted in 97. Members of the committee might recall that the council adopted a core strategy that was called the Thurrock Local Development Local Development Framework Core Strategy in 2011. What happened after that was that the government introduced the MPPF in 2012. That was the first version. So the council then revisited that core strategy in light of the MPPF, and we amended some of the policies. So the core strategy was updated in 2015. So we're working from a core strategy which sets out a number of strategic policies, thematic policies, and policies, development management policies, I should say, which dates from 2015. So we're more up to date than 96, as I think you referred to. We took the decision, and again, probably would have been full council. Lee might be able to correct me. I probably would have been a full council decision in 2014 to embark upon a new local plan, and that process is underway. And the government fairly recently set out its sort of planning priorities for a potential new white paper, and it sort of said that all local planning authorities should have a new local plan by the end of 2023. If we don't, no doubt there will be sanctions, but that's what we're working to at the moment. But we have a core strategy which dates from 2015. So that's point, yeah, and there is growth factored into that. So you've mentioned 32,000 new homes. That could be the figure in the new local plan, but we're already working from the core strategy 2015, which has an amount of growth built into it. I think picking up on your points about the planning merits of the case, yes, that is a judgment, and it's fair to say each application has to be judged on its individual merits and the factors surrounding the case. What we've done in the balancing exercise, I mean, we haven't just plucked the weights out of thin air. We have been thorough about looking at recent appeal decisions in this borough and being consistent about the amount of weight which should be afforded to certain factors. So that's why we've said for 5-year housing, land supply and affordable housing, you should give that significant weight because inspectors have given that significant weight. That's fair. But in this particular case, from the other arguments which have been promoted by the applicant and the other factors which you've put forward to support the scheme, there isn't anything significant in there, in our view. So there, on that balancing exercise, which is basically what it comes down to with Greenbelt, that balancing exercise about harm versus benefit, we don't think the benefit clearly outweighs the harm, and therefore you haven't got very special circumstances, and therefore the application should be refused. I mean, I think you mentioned things like the local plan failure. Well, we do have a core strategy, and the policies which relate to the Greenbelt have been upheld by inspectors at appeal. I bet that's about all I can say on that particular point. Yes, there are some policies within the local plan where the MPPF is more up to date, and in those circumstances, the MPPF would supersede your own core strategy. But the Greenbelt policies, which are the applicable policies here, they've been held to be robust, and as I said, in recent appeal decisions for residential development, refusals have been upheld and permission and appeals have been dismissed.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. But when we come to the crux of it, Matthew, is because this authority doesn't have a 5-year housing supply, we are in this predicament. Because basically, we have a position where applicants can come along and say, well, you haven't got a 5-year housing supply. And if it goes to the Secretary of State, they will give that significant weight because, again, we've failed. We haven't identified the land. And until we get a new local plan, if it comes in 23, that will be marvellous. But that's 3 years' time. And 3 years' time means that myself and my colleagues around this table still have residents on a 10-year waiting list, on a council house waiting list, that need homes. We can't wait till 23. Would you agree with that?
Chair, I mean, I think I've expressed on more than one occasion tonight that it is accepted that the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply. And that's been a situation which has been in existence for a good while. And I said I've mentioned an appeal, which was a public inquiry, where I represented the former Development Corporation, which was in 2010. And at that point, there wasn't a 5-year housing land supply. It's not a desirable situation, clearly, because your constituents are emailing you and there's a housing waiting list and there's demand and that needs to be met. So there's frustration. We have to put that in the context of the Greenbelt. This is a site in the Greenbelt and there are very, very strong national and local planning policies about protecting the Greenbelt. And I'll say it again because it's worth saying, where we've had our decisions to refuse planning permission for residential development in the Greenbelt tested at appeal recently, although significant weight has been afforded to affordable housing and the contribution towards housing land supply, that has not clearly outweighed harm. Put simply, it's the same. We're in the same case here. If you want my honest professional opinion, if you were to refuse planning permission and the applicant appealed, we would have a very, very good chance of successfully defending that decision at appeal.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do, I'll go to Fletcher as the last question, and then, sorry, Councillor Fletcher, and then we'll go to debates. Thank you. Sorry.
Actually, Chair, thank you, Chair. Actually, I was going to suggest, going to be a bit radical here. I think we actually have started the debate and have been in the debate for at least 10, 15, 20 minutes. I'm also going to further suggest that I don't think we've heard anything new tonight, either in terms of the reasons for or against. I'm going to move we go straight to a vote because I really don't think we're going to hear anything new.
Yeah, okay, well, I think that's fair. What I'd say is I would like to express very briefly a sum up as my capacity as chair. Yeah, and then obviously if other members want to, I understand what you're saying. It's an hour and a half on this one, but yeah, you are right. So let's okay. So we'll go into debate now. We'll start with Councillor Byrne, then I'll go, and then I'll invite anyone else. Councillor Rice would be after me. Thank you.
Thank you. The Councillor Rice and Councillor Lawrence are making me bend, which I'm hating myself for. But say this is a scruffy piece of land on a Greenbelt site. This is a Blackshots. This is a Tilbury Marshes, isn't it? If we don't leave here tonight with this going through, then you're going to have every resident of Blackshots baying for our blood, aren't they? And quite rightly so. So I think if we voted for Blackshots, there's no way we can walk out of here tonight and not put this through. It will be criminal on the people of Blackshots. So for that as well as what they both said, I think we have to leave here tonight voting this through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Byrne. Sorry, what was the reference to Blackshots site? Sorry, sorry, Langdon Hills? Yeah, yes, the third one, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll lead on. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, look. I understand that. Look, I mean, I'll pick up on the comments. So first of all, I mean, I've been on planning a long time now, and you know, my own personal opinion is this is a bad one. I understand the pressures that we're all under. Councillor Rice, you've raised a lot of comments there in terms of the housing supply, residents in need. I mean, look, realistically, look at Red and Blue, look at Conservatives and Labour. Since 1997, it simply hasn't been there, has it, from the Labour government, from the Conservative government. The fact that we've got a waiting list of 10,000 homes is not the responsibility of our residents. And ultimately, I think we do have a responsibility to protect our residents from too much development. Now, Councillor Lawrence, I think you raised some very valid points. When you referenced the 362 homes at the college site, I mean, it was a development corporation site. I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible design. I'm actually really glad that we sort of moved away from that, and we're actually starting to make our own decisions now. I think that we have to have sympathy for the residents on Woodview. 10 years ago, they had a field behind them, a college field. They've got the horses field in front of them now, and they've got some fantastic views of Tilbury. And really, for them to look out their back window at those homes on the college site, to now come out their front doors and look at that acoustic fencing, I think that's it's borderline out of order. If you speak to our residents, and many of you will, they will actually look at it that we're building too many homes. In general, I do get that some residents think that we need more homes, but in general, you know, I get grief that you're building everywhere, councillor. This is, you know, there's not a parcel of land you guys aren't developing on. So I do think we need to protect the residents on this one. I think that it is a very poor standard. And we've got to be realistic that if we're going to turn around and say, you know what, this parcel of Greenbelt is acceptable, really, I don't think it's fair for us to go back to our own. And I mean that with the greatest respect. We really can't go back to our own rules and go, vote for me and I'm going to protect your green belt. Don't worry. When that comes to planning, I'm going to speak against it, because ultimately it's what we do. We're signing it off. The fact that we're behind on our housing supply is not our fault. And in my opinion, this is an abuse of the powers that are given to us. There is absolutely no reason logically that we should be approving this. And if it goes through, this is a real bad one. This is, in my opinion, it's probably one of the worst ones we would have ever approved. We've heard from NHS England. We know the surgeries are full to the brim in the local area. 29,000 is not going to cut that. Obviously, I appreciate it's cleared some hurdle to say that is acceptable, but in reality, it's not. We've heard that it's urban sprawl, and we've heard from our residents, they do not want this. We're elected to protect them, and yes, we do need to build some homes. I'm not actually against building on this particular site. I just would like to see it go through the local plan. The fact that it's surrounded by acoustic fencing is completely unfair, and I really hope that you don't. I'll respect your decision, whatever you do, but this is a real bad one. And, you know, to approve this, I think we're doing our residents a disservice. I understand that might have been a bit heavy. I don't normally say that about these particular sites, but there's no defending it. We can't just build on Greenbelt just because it's homes. The 35% affordable housing, that's standard. That's the sort of standard that I expect from an average parcel of land. So hopefully you don't go down this road. I personally don't think that there's enough material reasons to reject it. Of course you can, but I think we'd be leaving ourselves massively exposed. I've got no more to say on it. It's a bad one, but yeah, I'll pass it on to you now, and obviously that's up to you. We will go to the vote for rejection, but if that gets dropped, we'll then go into a potential approval. So Councillor Rice, if you'd like to.
Well, thank you, Chair. I do understand what you're saying, and it's not the fault of this administration or the last administration. It's a fact where we are. And the problem we face is that we do have a 10-year housing waiting list on our council homes. In an ideal world, we'd be building 1 million council homes to get people back to work. But reality is, we're not going to do that. So we're going to rely on building 32,000 homes, and out of those 32,000 homes, a circular around about 10,000 in affordable housing will come to this authority to seek a resolution for the people that you and I and every one of our colleagues here tonight get bombarded with emails. I only had one this afternoon. It's pitiful, but here is a young person. She has 2 children. And where is she habiting? She's habiting on her grandparents' sofa. She hasn't got the ability to pay £1,200 rent to a private landlord. These are the problems we face. And with this applicant giving us 28 houses, I read somewhere, and they're going to be 1 and 2 bedroom, some 3. You know, we've got to take care of our residents. We've also got to take care, and what you rightly said about the green belt. But we also have to think that in the eyes, really, this site here, one of our past planning directors, Mr. Newman, would have called a windfall site. It gives us the ability to build 75 homes and have 20 affordable units, which the council will get nomination rights. We're in this position, and we can't have the blame game, whether it's us or them, etc. But we're in this position because our authority has not got a local plan. We haven't got a 5-year plan, a 5-year housing supply. And again, it's not your fault, it's not my fault, it's the authority's fault. That's where it stops. But where we are now is we have a problem. And when we've got that number of local people and they're not housed and they're dependent on the government to intervene and put them into private landlord accommodation, I don't think that's a satisfactory outcome. And it's for those types of reasons, and I did allude last time to shovel-ready projects. Well, it's a debate whether this is or isn't. It's an opinion of an officer, it's an opinion of myself. It's like when we turn, Chair, to the items where we talk about the weights. As the legal advice from Paul Shadavarian says, it's up to members to align the weights. And again, if the members disagree with the officers and it's in the resolution, then that's what has to happen. So I'm coming still, Chair, to looking to approve this application because we've got to get homes for local people that can't afford to buy. And we've got all these people on our housing waiting list. Unless we start to be brave and grapple with these types of scenarios, these people will be left on a heap because they've got nowhere to live. They're the sad facts. And it's for those reasons, Chair, I will be supporting this. I believe this is sustainable development. It's well designed. And in the absence of a local plan, we've heard we've got a core strategy and a suite of policies. That's great. But because of, and again, you can talk about the government. It doesn't matter which government it is. It's our government. And our government at this time, we haven't got what we need. So we have to look at every application on its merits. And I do regard this site very much as an infill site. The officers do tell us that it's greenbelt. And in the strictest term, yes, that is correct. But we have to take windfall sites. And that's what a previous planning director, Mr. Newman, kept on telling this committee time and time again. And when my colleague, Councillor Lawrence, talked about the actual college, when the college was knocked down and redeveloped, we were told by the then director that we must put that into our development plan because that was part of the numbers. You know, this was the guidance we were given. So we are where we are, Chair. I think, unfortunately, we're pushed into this position because we haven't got enough council homes to house our local people. In 1975, when my late father, and he's on that board twice as the past mayor of this borough, we had 25,000 council homes. And what happened? In 79, the government came in and said, we'll sell some off, which is fine, but they never allowed local authorities to replace them. And this is where we find ourselves. We're in a housing crisis, and the housing crisis is not just peculiar to Thurrock, it's peculiar to the whole country. And it's for those reasons we have to be fair once and for all to the people that we represent, and those, the majority of them are, on a housing waiting list. Because of that housing waiting list, 28 homes will be invaluable. And, you know, it's for those reasons, Chair, and I have a list of reasons why we can depart, and obviously I'll give those in due course, Chair.
Okay, we'll go Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Rice, I have people in my ward who are homeless, who shouldn't be homeless. It's an absolute bloody tragedy. And I find myself banging my head against a brick wall trying to get them somewhere to live. I think if we could somehow find 10,000 houses from somewhere, it'd be wonderful. And I do think we need to put more effort into building social housing. 28 properties on a poorly designed development that probably won't survive the appeals process is not the answer. I will be voting against.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Lawrence.
I promise to say this quickly. I asked a question earlier with the 10 years that we've been slow in building for 10 years. If we step back and just left things to run as it is now, how long would it take for us to all catch up? Well, obviously, I didn't get an answer to that. So I think it's vital that we here on the planning committee sit here and scrutinise everything and question everything. I know Greenbelt is sacred, no one wants to build it, and it's not just in Essex, it's all over the country. Everywhere you go, everyone is building, and everyone's making these sacrifices for our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And a lot of the people that don't want this built are lucky enough to own their own homes or already have one. So they're not in this position where they've got family what's suffering and living on sofas and having a 35-year-old son still living with you because he can't get a flat. Now, if we let things go by the by and let the council carry on and we don't put up objections to what the planning committee say, this will carry on. Because in the Woodview, in the 362, what was granted, out of 362, there was 12 one-bedroom flats given, 12 out of that. Whereas this small piece of land, what we've got here, we've got an opportunity to have 28 out of 75. So, and I don't think also, because twice tonight it's been brought up mention of, elections and working out and helping, the people what's voted us in, we are doing that. And we shouldn't be considering that here tonight. We shouldn't be considering if there's going to be an election next week or not, because that just put extra pressure on us. All we can do is work for people here and all the families around. So for me, I consider, on balance, this small little area, and the acoustic fencing, I can assure you, will be okay, because I'm going to be living next door to one. You just put bushes in the front of it and it's not seen. Because at the moment, all they're looking at down to, if they go over the top, is a college or Tilbury Docks, which is working. So I consider on balance that this proposal would not significantly impact upon the purpose of Greenbelt policy. Therefore, I can find no conflict of purpose, and I'm going to go with it.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Steve Taylor. Before I do, I understand what you're saying there, Councillor Lawrence. When I referred to the reference to Greenbelt, I wasn't saying because we've got an election around the corner. What I was referencing was the fact that we're here based on our pledges, our manifesto pledges to protect the Greenbelt, and I think that they should be respected, and I don't think they're being respected here. So I understand what you're saying, that we shouldn't be worried about the electorate based on elections, but I do think we have an obligation to stand on the manifestos that we're elected on. I can tell you right now, the Conservative Party, definitely the Independents and the Labour Party are hell-bent. Number one reason why you elect us is to protect the Greenbelt, and we are not doing that here. We are basically betraying the people that elected us, and that's the reality of the situation. But I take on board what you're saying. There's no getting away from that. Go back to your leaflets. Every single one of them is going to have that. But it is what it is. I may not agree with your decision, but I will respect it. Steve Taylor, and then we'll
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick point. One of the things that I've observed, and funnily enough, you've just changed that, but what I'd observed earlier was that everybody that's spoken about it has talked about people on a housing waiting list, but nobody's actually spoken about the people it has an impact on that are already ratepayers in Thurrock, and whom some of them it will have an impact on. And if you're going to try and balance an equation, that's probably the important bit that's missing, because, and you've just brought that point up, so it kind of negated what I was going to say, because it's roughly what you said. But that's not, nobody's mentioned them until you did just then. Nobody's mentioned the existing taxpayers, ratepayers in the borough, and the effect that losing a part of the Greenbelt might have on it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll go to Councillor Byrne, and I think we'll head to the vote. Councillor Byrne.
By putting a spin on that, with people saying people can't afford to get on the ladder or rent ladder with £1,500 a month or whatever. I, fortunate enough, live in an area that's got money, and I've got people renting houses that could have easily afford £1,000, £2,000. They're paying £2,500 a month, but now they can't. So the spin of that is you've got people now with landlords wanting to evict them out their houses because they no longer got their jobs, and where they 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago they could have afforded £1,500. So that's the other end of it. You've got these people that are never going to get there, but now you've got these people that are going to fall off of it. So the landlords, and this will be full of landlords charging people rent. So that's the other end of it anyway.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's 7:53. I think we've had a good discussion on this particular one this evening. I think we've covered all areas based on the original deferral. I think to keep it quite straightforward, obviously there is a recommendation on page 151, and that's obviously the officer recommendation 7.0 to refuse this application. Would anyone like to? I'd like to. Oh, sorry, Lee. Did you want to come in just quickly? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So conscious that we're just about to go to the vote on this. Listen to the debate. To be honest, I am really worried about the direction that this application is heading. Before you make the vote, before you vote on the substantive recommendation, if that vote is lost and we end up in a place where the application is looking for an approval, we must have clear, convincing reasons that are substantiated by evidence. Incredibly dangerous not to have those reasons. Affordable housing or contribution towards housing cannot be the reason. Case law just does not permit that to be the case. My biggest worry is I'm looking at the reasons on page 44, the 7 reasons which have been put forward, and the case officers clearly explained, gone through those, spent the time to take notes for each of those. They're not unique in the remotest sense. They're easily repeatable over any Greenbelt site. So if the intention is to open floodgates, that's what we would be doing. I just wanted to come in a point around the local plan as well, because that's been commented on this evening. The new local plan, the council's vision for that is that it's community driven, that it actually allows the communities to influence strategic development in their area. And part of the local plan, we're rolling out design charrettes, which is talking to the communities, landowners, developers, to influence so they can see on a plan what they want with the infrastructure built in up front, to approve applications on an ad hoc basis like this, with token gestures towards infrastructure or affordable housing, which is only barely policy compliant. This isn't any. The affordable housing requirement would be the same on a brownfield site. This is a greenfield site, and we're potentially giving away a greenfield site for that. So, but urge members to really consider that, because the next step, if the vote is lost, is to come up with those reasons. And they, as I say, there's legal tests around what can and can't be considered. So at worst, this could be an unwise decision. At best, it could be an unwise decision. At worst, it could be an unlawful decision. So I just wanted to come in on that point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to clarify that point. All right then. So as we're going to head to the vote. As I said, I'll read out the names for the purpose of people listening in and the press at their request. Okay, so right with that on page 151, recommendation 7.0. Let me just head there quickly. The committee is recommended to refuse planning permission for the following reason. Now, I'll recommend that. Is that seconded? Councillor Fletcher seconds that. Okay. So all those in favour of refusal, please raise your hand. Okay, Wendy, have you got that? So that was Councillors Fletcher, Councillor Kelly and Councillor Byrne. Right, so that's now been lost. Oh, hang on. Yeah, sorry, apologies. Losing the bits there. All those against refusing the officer recommendations, please raise your hands. Okay, and that's that looks like 4 votes. So that's Councillors Rice, Councillor Shinnick, Councillors Salmons, and Councillor Lawrence. Was your hand up there? Yeah, excellent. Okay, so that's been defeated. I'll now hand over to Lee and then the rest of the committee to take this one forward.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, for the benefit of members and those who might be watching online, so we need to refer to the London Constitution, Chapter 5, Part 3. 7.4 refers to if the committee is of the same view, which it is, then it will again consider its reason for granting permission. A summary of the planning reasons for that decision will be given, which reasons must then be formally recorded in the minutes of the meeting. It's important that the justification for departing from officer's recommendation is recorded in the minutes, and those reasons are given at committee and in public, and that justification is not subject to later elaboration, which is more extensive than the oral presentation. Goes on to say that the courts have expressed the view that the reasons should be clear and convincing. Members must satisfy themselves that where they reach a decision contrary to officer recommendation, their reasons are substantiated by evidence and that they are able to demonstrate reasonable planning grounds for taking a decision contrary to officer advice. Members should exercise caution in not giving undue weight to any particular consideration. And in instances where the planning committee grants approval, the planning officer shall draft conditions to that approval and should be agreed with the chair. It's worth mentioning that because this is a referable case, there's essentially those 4 steps which need to take place, which is the application would have to be considered by the council's monitoring officer and subject to the decision being considered lawful. Then in conjunction with the chair, the drafting and completion of the Section 106 legal agreement and drafting conditions, and then referral to the Secretary of State. Chair, so the next step is to pass back to Matthew to read the 2 reasons for refusal, and then we'll need to record those the committee's rationale for going against those reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, so Chair, on a second while I catch up. On page 59 of the agenda, you had 2 reasons for refusal presented to you. Now, the first one is if you like, an in principle greenbelt reason for refusal, i.e. it's inappropriate development in the greenbelt. There's harm, by definition, harm to openness and harm to the purposes of the greenbelt, and that harm isn't clearly outweighed, such that very special circumstances don't exist. Second reason is related to that, but obviously is about potential visual impact of the acoustic barrier. So I think I suppose put simply, the question is what are the reasons which members are relying on principally to respond to that first reason for refusal. The second one is, in my mind, related. It's about visual impact, but again, it relates to the greenbelt impact in terms of its visual quality. So, now I'm just checking my notes. Bear with me a second. So I think there, as I said, there are 2 reasons. One, principle, greenbelt principle. Second one is visual impact, which relates to greenbelt openness. I think that the question now for members of the committee is to articulate the reasons why you think those 2 reasons for refusal have been clearly outweighed by benefit. So,
Councillor Rice, you raised your hand. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. I understood the position now we're in under our constitution is that someone should move the alternative resolution. I'm quite prepared to do that at this time, and then we'll have to rely on our planning manager, Lee, and our legal officer to say whether they meet the test or not meet the test. So I'm going to move, Chair, that the reason for departures is, number 1, the scheme will create employment during construction. Number 2, the contribution towards the 5-year housing supply is significant because we are a failing authority. We only have a supply of housing, I understand, of 1.5 years. I also believe that more weight should be afforded to the contribution towards sustainable development. And where the officers talk about delivering a sufficient supply of homes, they say there is no weight. I believe there's significant weight. The officers talk about achieving sustainable development. They say limited weight. It's my belief that there is significant weight attached to that. The next one, making effective use of land. The officers say no weight. I believe that should read significant. And then finally, the officers talk about achieving well-designed places. The officers say no weight. I believe that should be significant. We have, and this is a point of conjecture between officers and members, the Prime Minister has called for development-led recovery. It's my understanding that this scheme is a shovel-ready project because this will come back with a full planning application, and if we pass this tonight, we will be duty-minded to pass it in the future. And also that this is a windfall site. It's for those reasons that I'm moving the alternative recommendation, and I'd ask obviously for a member to second that recommendation.
Lee, would you like to take that forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll quickly comment and then we'll pass over to legal for review also. So again, I'd exercise extreme caution around factors which are not unique and ones that are easily repeatable on countless sites. Any building project will create employment during construction. That's just a fact. I don't see how that can overcome the green belt designation. Contribution towards 5-year housing supply has been spoken about so much this evening, and it has already been given significant weight, so there isn't any move on that. The next points, there's a series of points that's been raised, which is significant weight towards housing supply, effective use of land, well-designed places. Again, I'd exercise caution in just moving the slider bar from no weight to significant weight without evidence. There needs to be evidence, needs to explain why that is the case. Well-designed places, virtually, in my opinion, would be almost impossible to say that because it's an outline application where there's detailed plans. We don't know what these homes actually look like. We only know that there's 75 of them, and there's a broad parameter plan. The shovel-ready scheme, again, we've spoken about that, and because it's an outline application, officers don't believe that is ticked, and it's not a windfill site, it's a greenbelt site. A windfill site would be a large plot in a residential area or commercial area which could accommodate an additional property. This isn't a windfill site. So they're my views on that. Chair, with your agreement, I'd like to pass over to legal for Caroline's opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, was there a reference to the acoustic fence in visual? Because that was one of the. Did you have anything for? Because obviously the officers are raising a concern over the visual impact of the acoustic fencing and the impact that's going to have. So obviously you've raised your points, fair enough. But obviously that's a hurdle you need to jump over, I think. Did you have any reason why that should be sort of bypassed, or were you going to refer back to your original?
Well, I think one of the members did allude to it earlier, that an acoustic fencing, when you have housing in situ, you can actually plant bushes and trees to actually soften that effect, which they have done. If you go up to the Manor at Stanford Hope, there is an acoustic fence that runs along the Manor, and there is shrubs that does soften that approach up, and it's something that road engineers use. And if you look at the A13 as it currently stands, the M25, there's a whole measure of trees and shrubs that actually protect and block out fencing. So it can be overcome. That's what I'm trying to say, Chair.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I work at the Portsworld, so I drive down the Manor every day. I mean, my own personal opinion is obviously you get these acoustic fences, it's 2 metres high. I mean, no shrubs. I mean, it's a pretty pitiful attempt to sort of cover that up. I mean, I'd be more encouraged if it was sort of completely blocked. So I understand what you're saying, that you can partly block it, you can't fully block it. So it would be interesting to see what Manley say, but I'll take that on board. Did you want to go to legal, Lee, before we go any further? Okay, so what we'll do now, then we'll go to Caroline Robbins, who's listening in remotely this evening. Caroline, have you taken on board what the members have said, and could you pass us your opinion on that, please? Thank you. Just take a few minutes.
Yeah, I tend to agree with some of the analysis, because a lot of these have already been. There is no new. And they will be dealt with, and wait. It's quite difficult, well designed wait. Sorry? Is that a problem?
Try it
now. Hello? Is there a problem? Is there a problem?
Caroline? Caroline, could you leave the call and then rejoin, please?
Yeah.
Okay, try it now, Caroline.
Yeah, okay. Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes,
better.
Caroline.
Okay, yeah. Lee's right. On all counts, really. I mean, things like you can't give any weight to design because it's an outline. And you do things like the shovel ready thing. Well, I mean, what evidence is there? I mean, it is a matter of opinion, but at the same time, it's not a policy compliant. I'm not sure how much weight you can really give to that. The sustainable development, yeah, you could give some a little weight to that. Oh, what's happening there? Sorry, there's some sort of sound here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Carry on.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, basically, I in short, I concur with Lee's analysis. To be honest, it's very flimsy, flimsy set of reasons. To be perfectly honest, and it's very hard to see where you're going to get that weight. To be honest, very hard to see it.
Chair, we could add another one, the absence of a local plan.
Okay, right. So we've heard the opinion of legal. Obviously, Gerard has added the lack of a local plan. Lee, did you want to pretty much sum up where we are at the moment, and then take it from there? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're in a place where the substantive motion has been lost for refusal. The committee are in a place where they want to approve the application. The reasons that have been given for approval have been considered. Planning officers and legal have warned, quite clearly warned against those. Don't believe that they are watertight in any way, shape or form. So the vote obviously can progress. Constitutionally, the vote can go ahead. But I'll just emphasise that point around potential unlawful decisions. But clearly, that would be a matter for the Council's monitoring officer to consider. Okay.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think any of us in the room disagree on the desirability of building extra houses. I don't think that's really a point of difference for anybody. What I understand, and the reason why I voted as I have this evening and the previous evening, is that the reasons we are giving for approving this will not stand up. They're not sufficiently evidenced. They're not sufficiently unique, and I think that was actually quite useful, Lee, this idea that the reasons for approval need to apply to this specific site. So the fact that we don't have a plan and the fact we don't have a 5-year housing supply could effectively relate to every single application we ever get. If they're valid, why not? But my understanding is not so much that this is a bad thing that we're proposing to do. It just isn't going to get anywhere. If we're absolutely honest with ourselves, we've not got a decent enough set of reasons for this to pass the first hurdle. That shouldn't mean, by any means, abandon your principles. I've got great respect for everybody's principles, but it does look like we are effectively not putting forward a good enough reason for anybody else, but the majority of ourselves, to approve this application.
Yeah, I mean, strictly speaking, what you said there's correct. I want to be respectful here as well, because obviously, we're all entitled to vote how we want to vote. I think, strictly speaking, if we was to approve it, it's got to go through the monitoring officer. as the first point. If it then gets fired off, it's, in my opinion, whilst it's incredibly controversial, whether it gets picked up or not, I'm not sure. I simply don't know. It's not something that we've done. So we are where we are. What I would say, and I hope this is respectful. I mean, I think it's kamikaze stuff. What you're doing. I mean, it's borderline madness, but you're putting yourselves massively at risk. But you know, as I said, I want to be respectful of your views and opinions, and it's not something I've experienced before as chair, and I know that you know, we're under pressure, but to put yourselves at massive risk like this is for 76 homes on a greenbelt site when it could come back to bite us in you know, in any which way. But look, I can't go no further. I think we've pretty much picked up the gist of it, and I respect whatever road you go down. So, Lee, unless you've got anything else to say, I'll pick up with Councillor Rice, and then obviously you head to the vote, and we'll take it from there. So, Councillor Rice, what did you want to say there? Thank you.
Yeah, I do respect what you're saying, Chair, and I respect what Councillor Fletcher has said, and our other councillor, Councillor Bryan. But I still maintain that when I've changed these positions, like achieving sustainable development, I've said significant. You know, it's a matter of conjecture. It's an office opinion and a member opinion. Now, if the members are willing to pass this, then it will go to the monitoring officer, and at the end of the day, the Secretary of State can say, well, I don't like it, I'll kick it out. You know, that's open, you know. But I think we have enough reasons to push it along. It's up to the monitoring officer to decide whether it's safe. We've heard the legal advice. We have other legal advice here from Paul Shadavarian, who's a QC, and with the greatest respect, I would say QC probably has a better understanding of law than other legal people. That's not to disrespect our legal representative, but I think QCs do have a better understanding of planning law because he's an expert. You know, that's my understanding. But for those reasons which I've outlined, I think we have enough. You know, when we talk about achieving sustainable development, the officers say very limited weight. I say significant. I can accept on the achieving well-designed, fair enough, we'll take that out, we'll say it's no weight. But when we're talking about making effective use of land, the officers say no weight. I think it's significant because we are making use of the land. When we're talking about delivering a sufficient supply of homes, now, whether we like it or not, we haven't got a 5-year supply of homes. The officers say no weight, I say significant. You know, those are disagreements between an officer and a member. But at the end of the day, we've come up with a list of reasons, the shovel-ready projects, the employment, and let's be quite clear, Chair, the absence of a local plan. We haven't got one. We've got a core strategy, but we haven't got core for sites. So we have to look at these. And it is my belief, whether the officers agree with me or not, I believe this is an infill site. You know, and I also say to you, Chair, that every application, as our planning director has always told us, Mr. Millard, and I have the greatest respect for Mr. Millard, he's always said that every application is treated on its merits. So it's for those reasons, Chair, I put forward a form of recommendations. I believe that's because when we look at it, we haven't got a local plan. We haven't got a 5-year housing supply. That's why we're in the mess. We can't run away from this. So for those reasons, Chair, they're the reasons I'm putting forward. We are talking about sustainable development. I've said it's significant. And I think we've got enough there. It can go to the monitoring officer, and then obviously it can go after you and the planning manager have signed it off and go up to the Secretary of State, and he can be the arbiter. He can decide. Because let us make one thing clear tonight. The Prime Minister of this land has said repeatedly, he said it in the House of Commons yesterday, build, build, build. And that means building homes. Now, if we're not taking part in that, we're not going to get this country out of recession. Those are the facts. It might be a bit emotive, but they are factual. And I believe this is an infill site, and it's right and proper we take advantage of it, because that's what our former director, Mr. Newman, told us on many, many occasions. But I obviously would like to move to the vote now, because I think we've rehearsed the arguments enough. Obviously, the planning officers disagree with what we're putting forward. We let the monitoring officer be the judicial effect, and if he says it's okay, it goes off to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State will decide whether it is or not. And that's the end of it, Chair.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, I take on board what you're saying. I mean, whilst your opinion's valid, what you're saying there is you're saying we don't have a 5-year housing supply. We need to build homes. We've had appeals recently that have taken everything into account what you've just said. And when it gets to the inspector, he says, I don't care that you haven't got a local plan. I don't care that you're not building enough homes. You do not build on Greenbelt. Don't mean to point here. And ultimately, what you're about to do, and I mean this respectfully, you're about to run through a minefield, a planning minefield, and you might get to the other end of that field okay, but if you tread on one of those, if the planning inspector picks it up to Councillor Rice, I think you know, and I mean this with a great respect, you know he's going to lambast us, but it is what it is. As I said, we can't, we've been talking about this for 2 hours, 20 minutes, but look, we'll take the vote, and I'll respect the decision. Okay, so Councillor Rice has put, Lee, happy for us to go to the vote?
Chair, I'm just conscious that the legal officer isn't in the room. I just wanted to make sure that to give her the final opportunity, and then I agree with you. The item we should move on.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Did you just want to give us a final view, and then we'll move on? Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you're going to go to the vote, the monitor officer, if they think it's unlawful, then it will be a Section 5 report. You won't necessarily. It's not just going to go through the monitoring officer to the Secretary of State. So, I'm going to have to, put it to you, but you are going to have to take, bear in mind that this could well be, a Section 5 report when it's examined properly in the cold light of day, and the consequences of that, because it will go to full council, and as members have been made aware that this is something that's not kept within Thurrock. It's a measure that other councils and the public will get to know about, and I think that you just need to bear that in mind before you go to the vote. Alternatively, I suppose you could decide to defer that vote. Maybe, I don't know if constitutionally we can do this now, but let the monitoring officer then examine, and then it comes back. But that might not be possible in the constitution, so perhaps it's something Wendy should consider. Actually, it's a bit like the red plane playing the is it section? What is it? Paragraph 7 again, isn't it? There's nothing in the Constitution that actually says you can't. I'll leave it with you to contemplate on that point, and come back to me if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly, I'm conscious it's 8:30, so I'd like to suspend standing orders. I know we've got a few more items on the agenda. I do think that we'll probably get through them relatively quick, so I don't think it'll be too much of a late one this evening. Obviously, we've taken on board what Caroline said there. Obviously, look, there's major concern. I've expressed that myself. But obviously, as I said, you're well within your rights to make that decision. So, Lee, I'll just come back to you. I think really, if it goes ahead, we were aware of the risks. I don't think there's nothing else that can be said. I think we're aware that it goes to the monitoring officer, then potentially the Secretary of State. What's your thoughts? Are we happy to go to the vote?
Chair, I think all the advice has been given that could be given this evening. So
yeah, excellent. All right then, thank you. Okay then, right. So did I see some Councillor Lawrence? Did you want to say something there? Thank you.
Could I just ask about this Section 5 report? Because we've sent things to the Secretary of State before and it's not been mentioned. It's just that the past couple of times I've been here, it's been brought up like a little bit of a, seems like a little bit of a threat.
Well, I mean, what happens is obviously we approve an application, and then basically, you know, as a local authority, we're giving it the green light. And, you know, ultimately, yes, they do generally go through. But if obviously it's incredibly controversial, there is a chance that it could get picked up. And that's why it's always referenced, because it's important to know that whilst we're approving it here this evening, we just need to be aware. And obviously, if it does get picked up, it then gets scrutinised. And if it gets scrutinised, it's up to the Secretary. Well, you think I've expressed that I think if it gets picked up, we're in big trouble. But you're able to make your own decisions on that. If you're not worried about the risks, then there's something more we can add. So that's pretty much in a nutshell.
So it's basically what we normally do then when we send it off to Secretary of State, because this Section 5 I've only just heard about the past couple of meetings.
Well, what it is effectively, it happens on all applications. I just think when
it happens on everything, it's just that you're bringing it to our attention now.
Well, Lee, would like to come in, but it's generally the more controversial, the more, you know, the more it's on the radar, should we say. But Lee, pick up if I've said anything wrong there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor Lawrence's question around the Section 5 report. The Section 5 report isn't the Secretary of State. The Section 5 report considers whether or not the council is making a lawful decision or not. So if there are no clear reasons and evidence reasons for making a decision, the monitoring officer has the right to take the view that any decision, could be any decision of the council, is unlawful, and then that's as Caroline said, it's quite serious and would need to be considered, as I understand, and Caroline may correct me, that it's a full council decision before it would then, and then that would then mean that it would have to explain the reasons why, and you know why we've come to this view, why the committee's come to this view. But that's why the advice to the committee this evening is not to go near that, because it's verging on that unwise to unlawful boundary, and that's where the monitoring officer needs to consider that. And if it moves into unlawful territory, then the decision may not actually be released from the authority. That's the most extreme point. But if it is, then obviously clearly the Secretary of State is the next step. But the Section 5 has come up in the past 2 meetings because there's been this coasting quite close to unlawful decisions. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so like with Langdon Hills, obviously when we passed it, I'll be honest with you, I did look at it and think, will the monitoring officer pass this? I must admit, it was a concern. I think there was quite a lot of meat on the bone. I think we really did. We re-argued the C2, C3 use. We came up with some really good consensus. I mean, with respect, I don't think that's here this time, and I think the monitoring officer's relatively new. I think he's got a tough decision to make, but you know, look, it's we are where we are. Caroline did want to come in, and then I think we'll wrap this one up. Thank you. Caroline, would you like to go ahead, please? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yes. That is the point. You see, the Section 5 report is to capture unlawful decisions made in the council, and it would be taken to full council. And if it is agreed it's unlawful, I don't know what the full council would do, but presumably it wouldn't go anywhere. You know, it would have to be, you know, that there wouldn't be a decision. Perhaps I don't know what would happen next, but except that I know that it's a very serious step. It's a very serious step to make an unlawful decision, actually. And, you know, at this point in time, we you know, there are grave concerns that this decision is very much, you know, touching that boundary. And it's not a clear boundary. And it's not a good place to be, and it's you don't want to end up with a Section 5 report. So and you know, that's what could happen. That's basically the what's on the table.
At the end of the day, though, it just depends, doesn't it? It's your mind and our mind. So it's just point of view. You're saying it's unlawful because we're just not agreeing with you.
I'm not entirely sure that's fair, but obviously you're right to express your opinion. I'll be honest with you. I mean, come on, look, how often is it that I raise concerns like this? Councillor Fletcher, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, no, I don't think that what we've been talking about here for the last however long is a matter of opinion. I think from what I understand, from what Lee's come back with, an argument to be acceptable has to be evidenced. My understanding is we don't have the evidence for some of these arguments, so I don't think it's a matter of opinion. Monitoring officer may consider that he doesn't need the same level of evidence as Lee. That's a matter of opinion, perhaps, but actually whether or not you've got evidence to back up an argument, that's not a matter of opinion. Either you do or you don't.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I think it's 8:30 now. I appreciate, obviously, we've been discussing this for 2.5 hours. I do think it's important that we come up to the right decision, whether that's approval or rejection. So let's go for it. So, Councillor Rice, I understand, obviously, you'd like to move your vote. So, and is that seconded, Councillor Shinnick? Okay, so in reference to the recording, that's Councillor Rice has come up with a proposal that's seconded by Councillor Shinnick, and that is a mind to approve with the reasons that have been raised by Councillor Rice. Okay, so all those in favour of approval, please raise your hands. Okay. Okay, so that's Councillors Rice, Councillor Shinnick, Councillors Lawrence and Councillor Sands. And all those against, please raise your hands. Okay, and that's Councillor Byrne, Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Kelly. Okay, so that was 4 votes in favour and 3 votes against. So that means, Lee, if you're happy, we'll go for approval and move on to the next item.
Thanks, Joe. It was just the point I made earlier about so referral to the council's MO, then subject to a lawful decision being deemed to be lawful, then necessary conditions and heads of terms for section 160 to be clear with yourself, Chair, and then referral to the Secretary of State. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So with that, we can say at the moment, we're obviously as a committee, we're minded to approve land adjacent to Woodview and Chadwell Road. That's 19/01373/OUT. Okay, so we've got 4 more items on the agenda. I don't know if anyone needs to have a bathroom break. Obviously, we'll be nice and clear and concise with these. Did anyone want to adjourn briefly, or should we crack on? Councillor Lawrence wants to adjourn. So we'll keep it nice and short, 2 minutes, and then we'll all come back here. Thank you so much for all those who were remote. That's 2 minutes, Councillor Churchman, if you wanted to go to the toilets. I'm just going to go and get a can of Coke. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for that. We've got 4 more items on the agenda. I think everyone's back in the room now, so let's see how we get on. We'll go over to item 10, which is 19/01394/FUL, Little Mulgraves Farm. That's Lower Dunton Road, found on pages 155 to pages 222. And Chris, if you'd be so kind as to present the report. Thank you.
So this is Little Mulgraves Farm, Lower Dunton Road in Malvern. This is a planning application for the creation of a new hospice and the provision of 80 new dwellings, along with associated infrastructure. Members will be familiar with this site. This is actually the 4th application since the original planning permission was issued back in to the 2014 application. There's no change to the proposed hospice with this development, and this application centres around changes to the residential element of the development. Changes involve a revised housing mix for more 4-bedroom dwellings, 59 in total, and then the reintroduction of some 5-bedroom dwellings. There's 7 of those, and the rest of the development, just to complete that, is 14 3-bedroom dwellings that make up the complete housing mix of this development. Lots of different house types are proposed as a result of that from the proposed developer. Those who have passed the site recently will note that the site has been subject to construction work, and the slides that you'll see in a moment will show some of the completed houses to the front of the site and a nearly completed hospice building as well. The development subject to the construction relates to the most recent planning application, so those that were already built are part of that previous application. And this application doesn't propose any changes to the dwellings already built, partly built, or the hospice, as I mentioned. It's about those beyond the back of those houses that are already in situ that would be subject to the changes. So just to go through the slides. So this is the location plan. As you can see, the ordnance survey is based on how it was in the past. So that was previously occupied by a dwelling and some equestrian buildings as part of a kind of rural type of use you'd find in the countryside of horses, etc., and fields. Other land uses in the area include some ribbon development along the road and the golf course directly to the opposite of the site. These images are provided by the applicant. They're actually drone images that are very useful. This shows the site looking east, so it gives you an idea of the road layout, those houses that have already been built that front onto the site, and the hospice sort of in the background slightly. That is the hospice building for its construction, and those are the houses that have already been constructed. If you like, they are the kind of the show houses that are being used by the developer for promoting the sales of the properties on the site. This is a layout from a previous planning permission. Now, this is the 2017 permission, which I'll refer to because it's referred to in the report, and it's similar in terms of the size of the houses in regard to this development. So that's the previous one. You'll note the layout in terms of the road alignment, the plots, the landscaping that is shown is pretty much very similar. Hardly any changes to that. In fact, the road layout is the same. The landscaping as well being proposed. Slight changes to some of the plots, but generally, more or less, they're all the same. Attenuation pond to the northeast corner of the site, and bit greyed out there, but that's the hospice part of the development. That plan is to clearly show what's changed in terms of the and what is being promoted through this application as the revised site layout. I now come on to a series of house types. So this is one of the 3-bedroom units. It's referred to as a Cambridge. All got different names, and that's a 3-bedroom detached dwelling. I should say they're all detached dwellings on this site. That's one of the 4-bedroom ones, known as the Balmoral, and that's the another one. That's bring on to the 5-bedroom unit. This is the Marlborough. That's the layout for that one. So that 5th bedroom's kind of 5th bedroom come study over the garage. And then we've got some street scene plans to show the site's not entirely flat, as that shows that the ground does rise to the south. And there's the more street scene elevation plans as well. And they've got some more photos of the site. And as you can see, the design approach for this scheme is a bit more clearer there in terms of that picture rather than the plans. Is an approach where, as with the previous applications, an arts and crafts design approach for this building. And that's one of the house types, and that's another one. These are the ones that show homes directly to the front of the site, so it gives you an idea in visual, actual built form what those properties would look like with this application. And there's some of the rear gardens as they stand at the moment. I should add that the boundary treatment will change with the actual development itself. The usual more privacy for each person's garden for those plots rather than the railings are shown at present. But it gives you an idea of what those rear of those properties would look like as well. And just turning to the plans of the hospice, because this application still does include the hospice exactly the same as it was before. So ground floor and a first floor plan, and we've got some 3D images and the plans of that as well. I haven't got any up-to-date photographs of that building other than the one we've shown from the drone imagery earlier in the presentation. So just to summarise, this application site does have live planning permissions. So if you like, they are the fallback position, irrespective of what we decided with this application. So there is still live planning permissions that can be implemented at this site. Obviously, the developer's intention is to implement this current application. So the only difference with the current proposal is the revised housing mix, as I mentioned, and there's some larger properties with this as well. No changes to the hospice. The proposal is in the greenbelt, and in terms of being inappropriate development and the impact on openness, that has already been considered previously, and it would be an appropriate development and would impact on the openness. But the consideration for this application needs to be given in cross-reference to the fallback positions of the previous application. So we're looking really what the difference is with this application, and does that have much more of an impact on the greenbelt than the previous ones? Our view is it doesn't. And that fallback position of the previous applications is outlined in the factors put forward as very special circumstances by the applicant. So the changes are only very marginal compared to the previous schemes, and it's therefore considered that the very special circumstances put forward outweigh the harm to the greenbelt of this application. As I say, the proposed layout and design approach is similar to the previous applications, and through the consultation process to the application, all material considerations have been assessed and are considered acceptable, having regard to the need for planning conditions and planning obligations where identified in the report. The recommendation is in two parts, that being that we have to consider the impact on the ecological designations, which is a common thing we were seeing with planning applications in regard to ecological designations, the conservation of habitat and species regulations. So that recommendation is that the proposal wouldn't have any impact on those ecological designations. They are the European designations on the edge of the Thames to the south of the sites. And the recommendation B is the planning application recommendation, and that is recommendation to approve. As stated in the report, it would need to be referred to the Secretary of State to decide whether it needs to be called in for consideration. And along with that recommendation, in recommendation B, is a list of planning obligations and the planning conditions to this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. All right, then over to questions. Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Chris, can you just assure us the hospice is on track and it's being built under these permissions?
Yes, of course. The hospice is on track. I had an email from the later this year. That was taken a couple of months ago, so since lockdown, things have started, I understand, or started on site again, or imminently starting on site again to progress the development of that hospice building.
Excellent, thank you very much. Were there any further questions? No, obviously this is an incredibly impressive site, and I'm really glad that the hospice is almost finished. I know it's been a long time coming, but yeah, this is something that we can really be proud of. There is a speaker statement. I'll go straight to that. Wendy, if you'd be so kind to read that out, and then we'll go to debate. I'm not sure there'll be too much debate on unless anyone's got any concerns. Thank you.
Okay, this is a statement of support from James Bompers, the agent. The report before you this evening is thorough. It has carefully considered the proposals and impact on the Greenbelt, and on Balance recommends the scheme be approved. This is welcomed by St Luke's Hospice and Red Row Homes. For those of you that have passed the site in recent weeks, you will see the schemes being delivered. The infrastructure is in and the new executive homes are coming out the ground. Most importantly, the hospice, which the borough so desperately needs, is also nearing completion. If all goes to plan, this will be completed in the next few months. This is something we hope to celebrate with you when able, as you helped deliver this vision. What should also be celebrated is the captains of industry want to live in Thurrock. For too long, house building in the borough has been dominated by a single type of housing product. This project will change this by providing larger family executive style homes. Members are minded to approve the delivery of the hospice and homes this evening. It is imperative we get the legal agreement completed in a timely manner. The heads of terms are in the report, and we already have a Section 106 agreement from the previous consent. I therefore trust your officers can work with the applicant to delivering a planning permission by mid-August 2020. Thank you once again for your ongoing support.
Okay, thank you. And one more question there, was that Councillor Ross, or debate? Debate, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I must say that it's excellent news that this hospice is on track, because I can remember this application in many years, and I think the figure that alludes to me is £5 million for the hospice. It's something the local authority would never be able to afford, and it's great to see the private sector working to deliver not only really good homes for the captains of industry. We might encourage some of our senior officers to live in our borough, which will enhance their lives and will actually give them a feel for the borough, which would be welcome. But I think it's an excellent proposal, and I think we should commend it, and I'll be happy to move it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, no, I'll take you up on that offer. I'm happy to second that. Unless anyone else has got anything to say. So that's application reference 19/01394/FUL. There's recommendation 8.0 on pages 200. Now, we need to take 2 votes on this one, Lee. Okay, so there's recommendation A. I'm just going to go to page 200. And their first vote is which is obviously what Councillor Rice proposed, is 8.1, and that's the local planning authority formally determined pursuit of relegation 61 of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017. All in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, we've got Councillors Potter and Councillors Churchman remotely also raising their hand. So that's the entire committee who's recommended approval of 8.1, and we're now going to move on to recommendation B, which is 8.2, and that's approved subject to the following conditions, and obviously they're displayed there. We will then go to Councillor Rice, which recommends. Okay, I'll second that, and we'll go to that vote. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, brilliant. And looking at the 2 gentlemen remotely, they're also in approval. So collectively, that's the whole chamber that has unanimously supported that application. Okay, brilliant. That then takes us on to item 11, which is 19/01739/CV, and that's Unit E2, Stanford Hope Industrial Park, Wolf Road. And Chris, I understand you're going to be presenting that report also. So yeah, when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Unit E2, Stanhope Industrial Estate Park, Wolf Road in Stanford, La Hope. This is an application that seeks to vary a planning condition 7 of 2000 planning application. At this site, the Stanhope Industrial Park is allocated in the current local plan as secondary commercial and industrial area, and therefore it is used for that industrial sort of uses at present that fall within that allocation. The proposed variation to the condition seeks to extend the hours of movement for commercial vehicles by 1 hour earlier in the morning than currently permitted, So the current permission allows for 7 a.m. start. This application seeks to allow for a 6 a.m. start at this site. So I'll just go through some of the slides to show you. So this is the application site owned red, showing red, and an aerial photo, a bit more zoomed in of the site. And we don't have any actual detailed photos of the site itself, but the main issue being that the road is there's HGV movements that go along the road and access the site, and they go along Wharf Road. This is in the residential area of Stanford, and that just gives you an idea of the houses that HGVs have to pass through, obviously daily, to visit this site and other sites on that industrial estate. But in terms of this application, at the moment they're not allowed to access the site before 7 a.m. in the mornings, and what they propose to do is access at 6 a.m. So just come back to the summary of the application. So as I mentioned, the hours, it relates to, as is stated in the application, 5 additional HGV movements before 7 a.m. However, it's considered the proposed extension of the operation of these hours is undesirable. It would result in additional large vehicle movements, which would be harmful to the amenities and living conditions of nearby residential occupiers, particularly in Wharf Road, which is the main road there, as the HGVs would pass by residential properties en route to the site. So this would be contrary to policy PMD1 of the core strategy, which does not permit uses that would cause unacceptable effects amongst the amenities of the area, in this case the local residents that live along Wharf Road, and contrary to policy paragraph 180 of the NPPF, again takes into account the living effects on living conditions of residents as well. The application has attracted a number of objections that support the concerns raised, and there's been a couple more since the agenda was published, and the 2 speaker statements in a moment in objection will be read out and demonstrate those concerns as well. But in summary, in the report, the concerns relate to the noise, the disturbance from the increased traffic before 7 a.m. in the morning on weekdays and Saturdays, as all stated in the report. Therefore, the application is recommended for refusal for the recommendation in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So that now opens it to questions. Do we have any questions before we go to speaker statements? Okay, Councillor Byrne.
Yeah, I think this is a case of residents, pleasing residents, or actually putting local jobs at risk. The very nature of this, a Wharf Road is what it is. It's access to a road. Do they have riparian rights on that, which basically means the road has the rights over the residents?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I don't know if any of our highways officers can answer that sort of question, or if not, Caroline in their legal team.
Thank you. Matt Ford, are you with us remotely as a member of Highways? Did you manage to pick up the question there from Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, it was a bit garbled. I didn't quite get that that question. Could you repeat it, please?
Councillor Byrne, thank you.
So by the very nature of the name, it's called a Wharf Road, which means the road was there for access for the wharf. And as far as I know, going back, they still have riparian rights, which basically means the road has a right of passage and not residents.
Right. Chair, I think in terms of the classification of Wharf Road, it is classified as an adopted highway. So the local highways authority have the responsibility to maintain that road. There is no other body that's responsible for the maintenance of that road. In terms of right of access, the development site does have a right of access, as it's the sole means of access into the property, and by virtue of it being an adopted highway, the public at large have a right to pass and repass on it. So in respect, no particular party has any more right than the other. So residents have a right to access, pass and repass on it. So does the operators of the sites on the Stanhope Industrial Estate, and the Highways Authority have the responsibility to maintain.
means they've both got equal rights, so they can go the hour early. So the thing I'm worried about this site is basically owned by Mersey Homes Limited, which are a developer. So if these people will lose contracts if they don't leave their site at 6, which means jobs losses, and then we're going to just play into the hands of Mersey Homes who are going to build on it. So this is about job protection and contracts. So I really need to know, is this riparian rights, does that outdate anything? Because the Road Traffic Act is, 1984? And this goes back to, 1800? So I think Wolf Road has more rights than you're saying. So can we check on that, or do riparian rights not come into it at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously with regards to legislation, it's probably better to be provide a response provided by a legal officer. But as far as I'm aware, the Highways Act in 1980 superseded all legislation that came before it, and the Road Traffic Regulation Act would have superseded anything that came forward. Came before it as well, but I'd probably have to revert to Caroline in the instance of the legalities of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is going back to history. This is quite an obscure point. What kind of rights did you call them? What were the name of the rights? What were the name of the rights again?
Do you want me to spell it?
Repairing, okay.
It goes back to the rights of passage for a Wolf Road. Every Wolf Road in the country, as far as I know, has more rights than anybody, and it does predate 1984, and that supersedes that. The 1984 Act doesn't supersede that. Every Wolf Road, by its very name, it goes back to history, where the River Hope supported the town by trade, and this has not changed as far as I know. So I feel for the residents, but I certainly are really worried about contracts being lost if they can't leave their site at 6 o'clock. So I think we really need to know whether I'm right on that, or it's the 1984 Act does supersede it, but I don't think it does with what I've looked into. So it goes back to 1700, 1800, but I think we're going back 400 years, but I don't think there's anything that's taken that over.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do, I'll go over to Chris, and then obviously Chris, picking up on that, is there a difference between passage and access times, or is it the same thing? Because I think obviously what you're saying is they have access, and of course they do, but obviously what we're also discussing here is an extension of operational hours. So maybe are the two things linked? Is there a difference there? Thank you.
I think we just need to put it back to planning, that this is an application to vary a planning condition, so we can't go into the aspects of what the Highway Act says. We're determining here a planning application, and the planning condition at the moment says you can start on site at 7 a.m. If you're starting at 6 a.m, those vehicles are going to be using that road and therefore affecting amenity, and the issue here is about protecting residential amenity from the people that live down that road, and that is our concerns, and that is why the recommendation is for refusal in terms of this application.
But every resident bought a house knowing that the industrial estate was there, so they was there first. The Wolf was there 1760 or whatever. So I would just want to know if they can legally drive, as far as I know, 24 hours a day. So they're actually being nice by saying 6. So I'm still saying this riparian rights gives them the right to come and go as they please. They're actually just doing it later. So it is to do with planning, because you could stop them. You could say they can't start till 10 in future. So they have rights as far as I know, and you are going to, this going to 6 will put people out of work. Simple as that.
The proposal involves 5 HGV movements that would be from 6 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. I don't know whether it would put people out of work, but it means that to be starting earlier rather than later if it were to be approved. But as I say, it comes back to the planning conditions. What the planning conditions are to deal with this site is the concern about the hours of use and the impact upon amenity.
Okay, we'll invite Councillor Fletcher in there. I'll come back with a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Do we know, and I appreciate we may not, do we know if this extra hour of opening will actually mean more HGV movements, excuse me, more HGV movements, or are we talking about the same number of movements just over a longer period of time?
Unfortunately, Chairman, that isn't stated in the applicant's details. It just says 5 HGV movements between 6 and 7, which could be additional, or they could be just varying their start time and starting earlier with the same movements that they've got now, but just that earlier time. And that earlier time is our concern in terms of amenity aspect.
Councillor Fletcher, and I think Councillor Ford, the officer Matt Ford is raising his hand.
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, apart from appreciate there's a relative inconvenience between 6 and 7, a lot of people are asleep, but for me it's quite important, this, because if you're talking about increasing the amount of traffic through that area, that's one thing. If we're talking about the same amount of traffic over a longer period of time, for me it's much less, or it sounds like much less of an imposition.
Matt Ford, if you can hear us, I think you was raising your hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. One of the benefits of working remotely is that I can actually look on the internet and find out some information for you to probably put some clarity into it. Riparian rights in respect of the highway isn't necessarily an access right to a watercourse. It's actually access rights for the maintenance of watercourses. So theoretically, a roadside ditch that is within the ownership of a farmer, for example, they have riparian rights to enable them to maintain the ditch from the roadside. In terms of the Stanhope Industrial Estate, as far as I'm aware, they don't actually have an access to the river. And as far as I'm aware, there are no roadside ditches that they would need to get access to from the highway, bearing in mind that their site is located on the southern side of the DP World Railway spur, and the adopted highway is very, very close to that railway siding. So in terms of the riparian rights, the applicant would not necessarily have the riparian rights on Wharf Road. And with regards to the Highways Act and the Road Traffic Act, there is obviously a weight limit on Wharf Road, which is done for the Road Traffic Act, which is sought to limit unauthorised HGV access. And obviously there's planning conditions that the authority is well within their rights, and we have looked at as part of our highways response to try and reduce the amenity harm on residents from uses within the Stanhope Industrial Estate.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Matt. I think that's clarified a few things. I mean, I'm being a ward councillor in Little Thurrock Rectory. One of the biggest issues I had sort of when I got elected was the Towers Road industrial estate, right in the heart of my wards. And truth be told, it's still the biggest problem I have today. I think long term we are actually looking at seeing if we can relocate those businesses to a more suitable location, because I just think Little Thurrock has outgrown the estate, and I wonder whether that's what we're seeing on Wolf Road. I know, I mean, I've always thought it would be a little bit more ambitious for access to be elsewhere on Wolf Road, maybe at the bottom. I would have to go over the rail track, which I think is the problem. It would be incredibly ambitious, but it would certainly solve access to that site. I don't think, we've not heard from the business, that's not ideal. I think we've got a statement. Didn't know about. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
This morning, people said, "Can we log in? Can we listen to it?" Because we didn't know anything about it. So I'm sure the businesses are unaware of this going on tonight.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Obviously, there's a lot of concern there. I think we've all, again, we're doing investigations in Towers Road at the moment because of noise during sort of unsociable hours. So it is something serious, and I do have sympathy with the business. I'll go to Councillor Rice. We've got a couple of statements to read out, and then we'll move on. Oh, apologies. No, we've got two statements here. We'll read out. Wendy, would you be so kind as to read those statements out and call out the names as you read them out? Thank you.
So this is a statement of objection from Tara Haruna, resident. Many of the companies at the end of Wharf Road have already incurred fines and warnings for disregarding the movement orders in place, so I am concerned that they will continue to ignore any movement order even if an extension is granted. In recent weeks, there has been an increase in HGVs on Wharf Road, disturbing the area and causing damage to a neighbour's car. The road is not fit for the purpose of supporting these movements. It is too narrow in places. Allowing movement for longer periods is likely to result in more damage as there will be more people at home. If the time of permitted movement was extended, we need to have space for a wheelchair ramp to be used on our vehicle, and it is scary to use when there are HGVs on the road. One slip up could be fatal. I have seen HGV drivers blatantly disregard the rules of road by driving on the wrong side of the traffic island because of the narrow nature of the road. There is also the increased pollution to consider. We want to raise healthy children, not be concerned about the emission these vehicles are emitting into the atmosphere. I hope the committee takes these concerns into consideration when deliberating the planning application. Should we move on to this is a statement of objection from Terry Piccolo, the ward councillor. Both Councillor Hebb and I strongly object to the extension of operating hours the applicant has requested. Wharf Road is a very narrow residential road with some houses being over 100 years old and not benefiting from more modern construction methods and soundproofing. The movement of 40-ton HGVs has a massive impact on the quality of life of the residents due to the noise and vibration. This loss of amenity is most noticeable early morning and in the evening. Whilst it could be argued that residents have always had to suffer HGV movements along the road due to the nature of the businesses located on the site, the number and size of the HGVs has increased dramatically over the last 50 or 60 years. The maximum HGV size 50 years ago was about half of what it is today. Back in the 50s, average car ownership was one car per 15 people. Today it is on average 1.4 cars per household. So not only has the size of the HGVs increased, the road now has more cars parked down it, especially early morning and in the evening when residents return home. Granting this extension to the operating hours would not only increase the disturbance to residents early in the morning, but in my view also pose a further significant road traffic risk due to the number of legally parked cars along the road at the time. To my mind, applicants should have checked the operating times for the site and either applied to change them before moving onto the site or found somewhere else to operate from. Our fear is also that should this permission be granted, it will open the floodgates for other operators on the site to make similar applications citing this case. I therefore request that the Planning Committee upholds the officer's recommendation to refuse this application.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. It was very kind of you to read out those statements. All right, so we'll now move into debate. Councillor Rice wanted to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we have to go back to the Thurrock Thames Gateway. They had the Treasury monies at the time they were in charge, and they could have built a link road out, even if it was over a railway line, it would have been possible. They had a link to the Treasury, but they refused to do it. And here we have the consequences. I think 7 to 7 is just about on the borders of okay. I have a similar problem in Chapel St Mary. I think long term, and I agree with you, Chair, the only way to resolve this problem is to build this out for residential and move these people into DP world, because that's where they should be, on a proper designated highway where they're not causing problems. And I know Wharf Road very well, and I do feel for these people because I think it's atrocious that they have to deal with this and the damage that it causes to their environment. And I will support, obviously, the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Lawrence.
I'd just like to agree what's been said. I really feel sorry for the residents who stand there and putting up with this, and especially that they're already having to put up with it going on a Saturday. It's a shame they can't have to stop it over weekends. So at least they would have had a weekend break, let alone give them an extra hour. So I agree with the refusal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Does this mean the dustman can't go down Wharf Road at 5 o'clock in the morning? Would it not be the same thing? If we want to stop movement, would we have to stop things like refuse collection and anything that moves that's to do with business?
question there, Matt. I mean, sorry, Chris. Yeah, is there any substance behind? Is there any difference between a dust cart or a business operating?
Well, I would presume that the refuse collection would be at a time of day that's from about 7 onwards, from what I understand normally. So I don't know whether that I don't know where that dust cart's going, if it's going down that road at that time of day.
Councillor Burns.
Sorry. Does that mean any business cannot go down that road before 7? As well, so we're just singling out the industrial estate, saying
we're just looking at a planning condition in regard to this business, and we're considering that. So I don't know about the other businesses. I know there's one other that I think that was allowed on appeal to allow for open. The rest of them are all 7 o'clock uses in terms of their startup.
Okay, thank you. And was Matt Ford was remotely raising his hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to clarify with regards to refuse vehicles, if the refuse vehicle is going to the site, they would not be able to do so unless it was within the hours of operation. If, so for example, a Thurrock Council waste and recycling vehicle, that would be covered under the traffic regulation order for weight limits in the area, as they are council utility vehicles that are undertaking a function similar to heavy goods vehicles that would be used to repair the road, or emergency vehicles that need to get access that would be over the allotted weight limit. So in terms of the site, they wouldn't be able to have refuse vehicles access their site outside the operating hours.
Okay, thank you. All right then, so I don't think there was any more hands raised. Obviously, we have the recommendation there, 8.0 on page 228. That's a recommendation to refuse for the following reasons. That's 8.0. Councillor Rice, did you want to recommend? Yeah. Excellent. Did anyone want to second? Councillor Shinnick. Okay, so if everyone's happy, we'll go to the votes. So all those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Okay, and it looks like we've got councillors Lawrence, councillor Shinnick, councillors Salmons, councillor Rice, and online we've got councillors Potter and councillor Churchman, along with myself, councillor Kelly, have voted for refusal. And no, he put his hand up too early. So we're now going to go for all those against refusal. Please raise your hands. Okay, and we've got 2 hands raised. That's councillors Byrne and councillor Fletcher. So with that, we can say application 19/01739/CV has been refused, which now takes us on to the last 2 items on the agenda. It's now kind of 9:20. And Tom, I think, is going to get in position to present the report. This is a calling. This is item 12, 20/00251/FUL, 32 Lancaster Road, Chapel 100 Grays. That's found on pages 231 to 240. So yeah, let's see what this is saying.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is located on the west side of Lancaster Road in Chafford 100. The site is within a residential area and is bordered to the west by a wooded area which is subject to a tree preservation order. On this aerial photo, it's quite hard to make out the site, but it's just in here. So there's obviously quite a lot of trees to the rear of the site, which slightly obscure what you can see there, but it's just there in the middle of the screen. This block plan shows the location of the existing dwelling towards the north of the site, so just there, with a detached garage to the south, just here. There is an area of hard standing between these buildings, which serve as a parking area. The proposed plan is on the right-hand side, but there's a more detailed one coming up. This is a planning application for the subdivision of the existing plot and the construction of a new detached dwelling, including off-street parking and amenity space. The existing garage would be demolished to make way for the proposed dwelling, and it's important to note this is an amended scheme following the refusal of a previous application in 2019. So on here you can see the proposed dwelling towards the south of the site in a similar location to the existing garage. Can I go back? Sorry, just by way of comparison, this is the previous site plan. So when I'm referring to the refused application, you can see the dwelling's located in a very similar location, but the footprint is slightly bigger on the previously refused scheme. I'll come back to that in more detail later on. In terms of the current proposal, the proposed dwelling would be a pitched roof design with the front gable end. It would accommodate 2 bedrooms and a bathroom at first floor level, with the primary living accommodation at ground floor level. There's a street scene drawing at the top here, so I'm not quite sure how well you can make it out, but the top street scene shows the existing dwelling, which is on the right hand side here, the garage, which is towards the middle, and then on the plan below again you can see the existing dwelling on the right and the proposed dwelling in the middle, similar location to the existing garage. And these 2 plans at the bottom, the section drawings, so that's looking north up Lancaster Road, that's the garage obviously, and this is the proposed dwelling, so you can see the difference in scale between the 2 buildings. Just by way of comparison, this is the previous street scene, so again you can see the design is quite similar to the previous proposal, and the scale is relatively similar, but there has been a reduction in the footprint when compared to the previous application. Just got a couple of photos. So this first one is the view from Lancaster Road. The existing dwelling is that one on the right hand side there. You can't actually see the garage at the moment, but it is in this area just behind this screening. And then this is a view, so again from Lancaster Road, looking towards the south of the site where it tapers and narrows. So yeah, looking south along Lancaster Road. Just in summary, the application represents the submission of an amended scheme following the refusal of a previous application for a similar form of development. It's important to note that the previous decision is a material consideration when you assess the current application. The previous application was refused as it was considered to present a cramped form of development in close proximity to the highway, which would have an over-dominant and overbearing impact on the street scene, and it was also considered that the poor layout of the private amenity space would fail to provide a suitable level of amenity for future occupiers. Both these concerns were considered to be indicative of a cramped proposal and the overdevelopment of the site. The current application has, as I've said before, been submitted in an attempt to overcome these reasons for refusal, primarily by reducing the overall dimensions of the dwelling house and the number of bedrooms. So the previous scheme was 3-bed, this is now 2-bed, slightly smaller footprint within the site. Whilst the changes are noted, the siting of the dwelling remains relatively similar to the previous application. The location of the dwelling would be at a point where the plot tapers considerably, meaning that it would still appear to be cramped on an uncharacteristically small plot. In conjunction with its close proximity to the highway, it's considered to result in an over-dominant and overbearing impact on the street scene, significantly forward of dwellings on this side of the road, and therefore it's considered that it would be out of character with the appearance of the street scene. In terms of the amenity space, most of it I think you will have seen on the plan is to the side, which again is somewhat indicative of a cramped form of development. To the rear, it's on average of around 3 metres deep, which is obviously quite small for rear amenity space. So it's still considered that the level of amenity provided is insufficient. It is noted that the proposal would result in the provision of an additional residential unit within the borough. However, this limited benefit in terms of the small contribution towards the borough's housing need would not outweigh the harms identified. Therefore, it's considered that the amended scheme has failed to overcome the previous reasons for refusal. There's no updates to the officer report, and the recommendation is to refuse the application for the reasons set out within this report. Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that detailed report there, Tom. We've got one hand raised. That's Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher, would you like to ask any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of questions. You've mentioned the, crap on repeating terms, but you mentioned one of the reasons for refusal being the look of this particular property compared with the uniformity of the rest of the area. How uniform, if you've sort of been down Lancaster Road, how uniform would you say the current appearance of the houses is?
I think rather than the uniformity of the appearance of the houses, it was more talking about on one side of the road you do have properties that do come quite close to the road. That's on the opposite sort of inside bend of the corner. But then on that side of Lancaster Road, as you approach, there's no real development on that particular bit. So it's not necessarily saying that every single house is kind of the same down there. It's more about where this one is positioned. So is this really a development plot, or is this trying to squeeze something in where perhaps it doesn't quite fit? So yeah, I'm not saying every house is the same. It's more of a siting issue rather than actual sort of what the house looks like.
Thank you. That does clarify that a little. And you mentioned the amenity. This is something that the lady who was dealing with the application when I was sort of asking her to sort of talk it through with me. This question of amenity size, we've come across it before earlier on this year with the Measons Lane development, when the planning department themselves did not consider the size of the amenity to be sufficient reason to refuse the application. So this does seem to be more of a more subject to interpretation than necessarily being the black and white rule. So clearly, in the case of Measons Lane, the argument was put forward that, well, there's a green space close by. This is also the case with Lancaster Road. So I'm wondering why, in this case, the size of the amenity is seen as reason enough to refuse when it wasn't in the other case.
I think I have to go back to every application being assessed on its own merits. I think with that other scheme you're referring to, you're obviously looking at the proposal in the round, and I imagine that was some more units, wasn't it? So it's not quite the same when you're looking at one dwelling, the benefits you get from that versus the benefits of multiple dwellings. And I don't know the exact kind of difference in terms of the private amenity space that was to be provided there compared to here. But I think part of the amenity space is kind of twofold here. It's the fact that how small it is and where it's positioned is kind of, as well as whether or not it provides enough amenity space for the future occupiers, it's also, does that indicate you're trying to squeeze something in that's perhaps out of character of the area? So, yeah.
Thanks. I mean, the out of character bit I referred to earlier, but I was keen. In fact, the smaller of the houses in the Measons Lane development were the same amenity size as this one. Finally, you mentioned in the reasons for recommendation, or at the beginning of the report, you mentioned objections from neighbours. There are no objections cited in this report here, and certainly at the point that the previous application went in, there haven't been any objections. So I'm just surprised not to see anything in here.
Yeah, in terms of neighbour comments, there weren't any received, but obviously we have to look at every application in terms of planning policy, whether or not we receive an objection. So we're still going to assess it appropriately. If someone raises a particular area of concern, obviously we consider that as well. But in this instance, even if there weren't objections, we're still going to look at it and assess it fully against all relevant planning policy.
So to be clear, the objections you're talking about are not objections, but possible objections that might happen, but haven't.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to, we're talking about future occupiers. So we're talking about when they go in there, is this going to be, in terms of amenity space, I think we're just sticking to that side of things. When they go in there, will that actually provide a suitable level of amenity for them? Obviously that person, whoever it may be, doesn't have a say at the moment. So we have to make sure that when we're allowing housing which does provide what we consider to be a suitable level of amenity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions? Because I think we've got a speaker on this one. Okay, right. Wendy, would you be so kind as to read out the speaker statement? This is a statement of support from Matthew Wood, and he's the agent. Thank you.
principle, as set out by officers in their committee report, the principle of the proposed development in a highly sustainable urban residential location is fully supported in principle. It is also particularly important to highlight that the application site is also of a brownfield nature, with the government making clear that such well-located brownfield sites should be prioritised in housing delivery in order to minimise greenfield development, especially within the metropolitan greenbelt. Design and layout. The officer's conclusions in respect of design and layout are noted it is important to highlight that these are of a subjective nature only, and the applicant is confident that the proposed development complies with all aspects of the adopted development plan, including the Council's recently adopted design strategy. The proposal would introduce a new dwelling to this location, which would be well distanced from the existing dwelling, with a good level of articulation space similar to that seen within the neighbouring residential area. The applicant would disagree that the existing garage and proposed dwelling would sit noticeably further forward in the street scene than neighbouring dwellings. Although a case could be made for this in relation to the immediate properties to the north, all other dwellings in the locality sit further forward within the street scene. As such, as one turns the corner on Lancaster Road heading south, the built street scene is more enclosed, including directly opposite the application site itself. As such, there is a distinct change in character at this point. In the applicant's view, the proposal would more likely constitute a stepped feature in this transition. It is also important to note that the proposed dwelling would sit no further forward in the street scene than its nearest neighbours on the opposite side of Lancaster Road. A green landscaping buffer between the front of the proposed plot and road would also be consistent with local character. The two-storey nature and scale of the proposal is also in keeping with its neighbours, and as such the applicant also agrees that the proposals would have an over-dominant and or overbearing impact upon the street scene in this location, adversely impacting upon the character and appearance of the street scene. Given the nature of the plot and topography of the land, the proposal includes a good level of external private garden space to the south, accessed via the side elevation of the proposed dwelling, with this space being fully private in line with planning policy expectations. The applicant wishes to highlight that such a layout of development is not alien and can be acceptable where it complies with other relevant planning criteria. As such, this space is private and of sufficient size whereby it would provide a good level of amenity for its future occupants. NPPF, despite the Council's lack of a 5-year housing land supply, the officer report appears to make no mention of the NPPF's presumption in favour of sustainable development, which would be fully engaged in this instance. In conclusion, these detailed proposals represent a sustainable form of redevelopment as supported by the NPPF and will be of a high quality design and layout. Officers' concerns are of a subjective nature only, and when applying the NPPF's tilted balance, the applicant does not consider that any such perceived adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of this proposal. Therefore, the proposals constitute sustainable development, and as such, members are urged to support this proposal and grant detailed planning permission accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further comments? Any further questions? Steve Taylor, and then we'll probably head to debate. Thank you.
Just a question, really, Tom. Just looking at the site, and I understand, both kind of arguments around the amenity space, but if that property were to be moved, looking at the scale on here, sort of north or just off north, further nearer to the other property, would that not then make more sense? If that were moved a metre or two closer to the other one, because that would then increase that amenity space quite significantly, given the tapered nature of it. That was just my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously had, when they got the first refusal, they had the option to go away and come up with an amended scheme, and they've chosen to go with it. They've chosen to go with a smaller footprint within a similar location. That they could have moved it slightly closer to the other dwelling, but then that might have impacted on their parking provision, and then you might have created a different issue instead. So, I think they've come up with what they think is a suitable compromise, and obviously we've given our view on that, and it's now for members to take a view.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. I was just thinking that maybe there'd been a bit of a discussion, perhaps, that may have helped both sides. But thanks anyway.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher, did you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, there actually was a discussion. Initially, it proved difficult to arrange, but I did finally manage to get the applicants and the planning officer together, and this application is off the back of that discussion.
Yeah, okay. So what you're saying there is that they had the discussion and that's what they've come up with. Okay. Because wouldn't have on the was that pre-planning advice? Maybe. Or?
I'm not sure that was a formal pre-app. I think that might have just been an informal meeting between officer and applicant, just to try and help them following the refusal. We do quite often offer that, just some advice on why it was refused and what you may want to think about. Then it's up to you if you want to do a formal pre-app or just go straight to the application.
Yeah, because I mean, I think there would have been ways to do that, the pre-app. I mean, I do advise my residents to do it because I think you'll get a clear idea of what you can and cannot do. But yeah, I mean, we are where we are.
It wasn't for want of trying, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're suggesting there that wasn't an option available at the time? Or?
What I'm saying is it took a bit of effort to get the two together.
From the council's point of view? Yes. Yes, that's strange. I mean, I've never been made aware of that, but certainly something we can look into. Okay, right. So with that, we'll go into debate. I think we're at that stage now. Did anyone want to start the debate? Go Councillor Fletcher, then I'll come in afterwards.
Yeah, just to firstly to clarify, you might be thinking, does he have a personal interest in this? No, simply I was approached by the applicants to talk about it, and I suggested they talk to the officer, which is how I ended up brokering the meeting between the two. The officer, I'd like to point out, was very helpful. It was literally just the ability to have a further conversation about the whys and wherefores that were difficult. What I want to say by way of opening the debate, very much respect the points that Tom has laid out, and I think it's important that we, particularly in an area like Chavard 100, which has had a fair bit of development on it in recent years, that we think carefully about any further ones. And I think as we've already had explained to us, you have to think carefully about any new development. I think my one point would simply be that we talked to at great length earlier on tonight about reasons for rejecting or for approving needing to be not only material, but evidence-based and robust. And my position is that the reasons for rejecting this one, while relevant, are largely a matter of opinion in terms of the amenity space, particularly in terms of how future buyers or future neighbours of buyers might feel about it. That to me is not evidence-based, it's based on an assumption. Quite simply, if a future buyer didn't think it was enough amenity space, they won't buy it. So my position is just that by all means choose to refuse if you think that the reasons given are actually material and evidence-based. If not, then I think there's insufficient reason to knock this application back.
Yeah, thank you. I think you raised some very, very, very valid points there. I suppose, from my standpoint, I suppose you are right, and I certainly could sympathise with this particular site. Certainly, with being in Chavard 100, it's very urban in its design, very, very dense. I mean, I suppose when you look at the recommendation, it says that the proposed dwelling, by reason of siting, forward projection and scale, would lead to a cramped form of development. It says it there, close proximity to the highway, over-dominant, overbearing on impact. So, I mean, if there is a potential for development on this site, I think I'd be slightly more comfortable if that was done under pre-app to see what, if possible, could be built on there. And I think it's important also that whilst this is just one in particular site, it is the sort of the principle, the idea that if we approve this, really, there's nothing to stop arguably other applications coming forward. Now that's not the end of the world, but I suppose really it's the idea of the amenity space and design. Is that acceptable? So I do think you raised some very valid points. It's not something that I would probably approve at this committee, because I'd be worried about the principle, and if one developer sees this, then we could have a lot more on our hands. And whilst there's no complaints on this one, there could be very many, much more. To be honest with you, I'm not quite surprised there isn't any, but it is good that no one has complained. But if we find ourselves in a situation where other residents are massively concerned over the borough, and the applicant and the agent have a strong case based on the decision that we've made, I think it's slightly too risky. But as I said, if there is something that can be done on this site that can be agreed in pre-app, I don't think I'd be against it, but it would need to hit that certain standard. But I think it's very valid what you raise, and it's up to the rest of the committee what they think. I'm just looking around. Did anyone else have anything to say on this one? No, nothing else to say. Councillor Fletcher, did you want to come back on that? Thank you.
I hate to sound like I've had a personality transplant, but given your thoughts, I wonder if a site visit might be an idea.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I said, it's not something that I think I'd need to see based on the principles, but well within your right to go to that vote. It's not something I support, but yeah, fine. So you've recommended it. I think Councillor Rice has seconded that. Obviously, we've got some people remotely. So all those in favour of a site visit, please raise your hands. Okay, and let's look at that. So that's Councillors Salmons, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Shinnick, Councillor Rice, Councillor Fletcher are in favour of a site visit. And all those against a site visit? That's Councillors Kelly, Councillors Fletcher, Councillors Potter. Churchman, sorry, Councillor Churchman, Councillor Potter and Councillor Kelly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chair, are you suggesting we all look alike?
Okay, right. Obviously, it's really important that we do attend that site visit. I know that the one that I mentioned at the beginning of the Tremorgan one, we've only got one attendee at the moment, so we voted for it. It's really important that we make every effort to be there for that. Lee, happy with that to go to site visit? Yeah, excellent. All right then. So that's application reference. That's application reference 20/00251/FUL. That's been deferred to a site visit. Okay, brilliant. That then takes us on to the last item on the agenda. That is the former Whiteacre in South Ockenden. Application reference 20/00593/TBC. That's agenda item 13. Tom, if you'd be so kind as to present a report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is located to the west of Dadeland Drive in South Ockenden. The site is currently vacant and the buildings previously located have been demolished. On the aerial photo, you can see the site just towards the centre here, to the south of the Bluebell surgery. There's a number of trees around the edge of the site, and you can see sort of remnants of hard standing towards the centre. This is a retrospective planning application for 2.4 metre high hoarding around the majority of the site boundary. The application is for temporary permission for a period of 3 years, and the purpose of this hoarding is to provide site security. It's probably quite hard to make out, but there's different sorts of foundation for the hoarding around the edge of the site. So there's some in purple, some in green. That's because of the proximity of some of the hoarding to various trees within the site. This is just a photo of the hoarding, so you can see what it looks like along Dadeland Drive. And in summary, the hoarding is necessary for the security of the site, whilst consideration is given to any future use. Given that the hoarding is only to be erected for a temporary period of 3 years, the impact upon the character of the area is considered acceptable. The landscape and ecology advisor was consulted on the application and raised no objection with regards to the impact upon trees within the site. And on this basis, it is considered that the impact of the hoarding is acceptable. There are no updates to the officer report, and the recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions set out within the report.
Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic. Okay, do we have any questions there? No, okay, no questions. I don't think we have any speaker statements here, so we'll go straight into debate. Okay, well, pretty straightforward, standard one. It's obviously good that there are. Yeah, excellent. All right. Okay, so application reference 20/00593. There is obviously a recommendation. That's page 245, 8.0.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Yep, certainly. Please go. If you use the mic, please, Councillor Morris. Thank you.
I just had a look through this, and I noticed that the land has been vacant for 14 years, and now the hoarding's going to go up for another 3. So could I just make it noted that this should be ideal for putting some bungalows on there, rather than leaving it? We're desperate. We're having arguments tonight, and talking about things, about finding places for people to live. I know several residents around that way would give up their 3-bedroom house for a bungalow, and that would give way to families. So could we take note of that and try and get something done?
Okay, yeah, I think that's noted. Lee, have you got that noted? Comments, thank you. All right then. Okay, I don't think there was any further comments or questions. Councillor Rice moved the recommendation. I'll second that, and that's 8.0 on page 245. Okay, all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, excellent. And looking across the committee, that's a unanimous approval. And so with that, we can say application reference 20/00593/TBC has been approved, and that is 21:45. That's not bad. 21:45. That's the end of the meeting, and yeah, we'll see you all soon. Fantastic. Thank you. Excellent. Good. And Councillor Fletcher, I think we'll just have a quick chat over your email. Thank you.